The entire holy tree on the mountain glowed like never before. The wyverns were chasing a black cat with a small kitten in its teeth. The black cat ran and thought that he couldn't let the owner of the tree take the kitten, so he didn't stop. The wyverns came closer and closer and tried to grab the cat with their huge paws. He ran. I only thought about the fact that he needed to run and he needed to carry this kitten as far away as possible. While running away, the black cat used magic so that these monsters could not quickly approach him. The very next moment, he used magic to push off and jump to get as far away as possible. He succeeded and he was in one of the clearings. In front of him he saw a small entrance to one of the caves where he could hide. So when he just landed, he immediately headed to this entrance to take a little rest. Entering this cave, the code thought that this was a safe place and the twisters would not be able to get them there. When they went inside, the little white kitten looked around and wanted to ask something to his black cat dad. The kitten turned to the black cat and asked his daddy if this was really a safe place. The black cat answered him that it seemed to him a safe place and they could rest a little. The kitten looked at his dad and asked him where they were now. He was very upset. The black cat, who was already missing one eye, told his son to wait for him in this place because his dad would be back soon. The kitten was very upset and started screaming that he would go with his father and that he didn't want to be left alone. The black cat came up to him, raised his paw and placed it on the kitten's head and then stroked him. The black cat told the kitten to forgive him, but the kitten can't go with him. Then the black cat added that he could no longer protect the kitten's mother, so he had to do his best to keep him alive. The cat said that he couldn't lose his son either. The kitten looked at his father and had no choice but to agree, after which the black cat asked his son not to listen to him under any circumstances and to wait for him in this place. As soon as the black cat gave all the instructions to his kitten, he immediately turned around and left the cave. A little white kitten was left alone in this cave and he was a little scared. He found a place for himself, curled up into a ball, and for some time he could not calm down. They whined. The little kitten kept looking at the entrance to this cave. He was waiting for his daddy to return. Night came. The kitten couldn't stand it and fell asleep waiting for his daddy to return. It was morning outside and it seemed that nothing could foretell trouble. The little kitten woke up as everyone should, stretched and with all his might. Afterwards he curled up into a ball again and continued to wait for his daddy. The kitten caught himself thinking that he wanted to eat. At that moment, a red berry rolled into the cave. It was unclear where it came from. The kitten didn't know how to react to this, but on the one hand he really wanted to eat, but on the other hand he didn't understand how they appeared here. There were more and more berries in the cave. It seemed as if someone was throwing them there on purpose. Of course he was happy about these berries, but he found it very strange that they were all lying in the path. So the kitten thought that something was wrong here, but until the end he couldn't even guess what exactly was wrong. And yet he decided to come closer. He thought that it would be okay if he ate just one of these berries. Then he was very close to this berry and was ready to eat it. He heard his father's voice that he needed to be careful. The cat managed to get there in time. He grabbed the kitten by the collar and jumped back with him. The head of a huge Vebern tray woke up in a cave and opened its mouth ready to swallow a small kitten. The black cat managed to use his magic power in time and jumped back together with the kitten, without taking any damage. The head of a huge monster lay right at the entrance to this cave. It seemed that he was already motionless. The black cat thought that they almost got caught. The little white kitten did not understand what happened until the end. Black Ear asked the kitten, and he, as a kitten, replied that he had tried to use magic, but it didn't work. He said that it was all over and he should breathe deeper, and he also added that in order to use magic you need to concentrate. After which the black cat told the kitten that he would later teach him how to breathe correctly. The black cat looked around and said that first they needed to get out of this place. He saw another exit from above. So the black cat used his powers and jumped up to get out of this cave. But in reality it was an ambush for them, as there were several more twists and turns waiting for them outside. The kitten shouted to his father that not only from the front but also from behind they were being attacked by monsters, and there were two of them. The black cat understood that he had no time at all and decided to kill them both with one blow. He made a sharp turn and cut off the head of one and then the second, after which the black cat landed on the ground. He thought that this was of course magic. The kitten saw another one of the monsters and shouted to his father that another one was approaching. At that moment, the black cat realized that he wouldn't be able to escape, so he would have to do something about this monster. Vivern was so close that he was able to strike the black cat with his sharp fang. The kitten realized that his father had taken the blow. He only managed to shout to him, "Dad." Not far from this place, a warrior was watching everything that was happening, but he did not understand what was happening. What tormented him most was the question of why the twisted ones appeared in this forest. So he decided that he, more than anyone else, needed to go and find out what had happened. The black cat, after receiving a strong blow, could not hold on and fell down. After a few seconds he went down with all his might, but he still held the little kitten. The black cat walked towards the shelter and blood dripped from his body, indicating that he lacked magic. The black cat thought that his strength was running out. The kitten kept asking his dad. When the black cat and kitten were in the shelter, the cat kitten asked his dad if he was okay. The black cat lay down hugging him and said that he just needed to rest a little bit and that he was fine. The black cat explained that he would lie down and gather his strength and everything would be fine, but blood was flowing from his body. Vivern was already near the place where the black cat and kitten were hiding in a few seconds. He saw traces of blood on the ground and realized where exactly the cat and the little kitten were hiding. It seemed that the monster was almost at his goal. He only needed to take one last step and he would be able to take the kitten. A black cat and a small kitten lay in hiding, realizing that they could be discovered at any moment. Moreover, a path of blood led to this shelter, which dripped from the body of a black cat. The next moment the monster's head was already at the entrance to this shelter. The little kitten was very scared. He started whining. He was very scared. Vivern stuck his huge head inside the shelter and opened his mouth trying to grab the black cat and kitten. At this moment, unexpectedly for this monster, someone from behind began to attack him, causing him damage. The monsters had no choice but to stretch out their heads and he saw that he was really being attacked. The monsters didn't have time to resist, so he was hit again and was hooked. The warrior decided to see what happened, hooked this wyvern and shouted at him to look at him. The monster jerked its head, tore its mouth open and pulled out its head with a hook. The warrior then realized that he could not hold this monster back and thus prepared himself for further battle. Vivern in a rage pounced on the warrior, believing that he could destroy him, and began to attack him. At that moment the guy jumped to the side and this monster grabbed the tree with its sharp fangs and gnawed it in half so that it collapsed. At that moment the warrior decided that he needed to act and he took out his sword to begin the attack. It only took one move for him to cut the monster's head off its body. The warrior looked at this monster and said that it was his own fault for leaving his lair, after which the warrior thought that by the way this monster was looking in the direction of the settlement, so he also headed towards the shelter to see what was inside. He knelt down and lowered his head. He wanted to see what had attracted the monster so much there. At that moment, when he lowered his head, a small kitten pounced on him screaming. The kitten was so furious and tried to meow so loudly that it seemed he was doing it with all his might. The warrior grabbed the little kitten by the collar and did not understand whether this monster was chasing the kitten, whether they really feed on kittens. Then I looked at the kitten and thought maybe there was another reason why he did it. Dima lowered his head down and saw that traces of blood led to this shelter. The warrior thought that there was probably someone else there and most likely there was more than one kitten there. At that moment the kitten managed to concentrate and he gathered all his strength and directed it at this warrior. The kitten aimed a blow towards the warrior with all his might, which was supposed to hit him in the helmet. Indeed, the blow was quite strong and the warrior's helmet flew off after this blow, and also threw the guy in the opposite direction from where his helmet flew. The guy landed near a tree and watched everything that was happening because he was not prepared for it. Look at this kitten and once again he thought that it was most likely magic that he used. The kitten stood ready to attack and shouted at the guy to go away. The guy was very surprised at what he was saying. So he looked at this kitten and thought that not everything is as he thinks. Yes, most likely a magical creature or something. The guy raised his two hands and said to calm down because he needed to try a dialogue first. The guy said that he would not fight, but the kitten seemed not to hear him and once again used his magical power and directed it at the guy. At the last moment he jumped to the side and this magical force hit the tree straight, cutting it in half. Then the guy thought that they wouldn't be able to have a dialogue and that this little kitten didn't understand at all. He was more aggressive than he even thought. So the guy decided for himself that nothing could be done about it and he would have to use force too. The kitten decided to concentrate for the third time in order to deliver another blow to the guy. The guy in turn thought that the dangerous creature should be eliminated, so he stretched out his hand to strike. But he didn't succeed in pressing the knife several times on the button. Something went wrong. At that moment a black cat came out. Blood was flowing from his body. The kitten turned to his dad. The guy then understood everything because the one he saw was the count of this wounded cat. The kitten approached the black cat and began to ask him to come back because it was dangerous here. Now everything became clear to the guy. He understood that in order to protect his family, the black cat did everything possible and impossible and was wounded. A little kitten stood in front of his dad and started screaming for the guy not to touch him from his father. Then he was very surprised because this little kitten created the first threat and now he blames him. The kitten seemed not to hear anything, took 2 more steps forward and began to concentrate his strength for the blow. At that moment, the guy extended his hand forward and told him several times to stop. He shouted for Dima so that the kitten would hear that he was ready to cure the black cat if he stopped. When the kitten heard about this, he stopped and asked the guy if it was true. The guy looked at the kitten, was silent for a bit, and answered him that it really was so. For some time you were there in the forest, it was quiet, no one attacked or attacked anyone, it seemed that everything around was calm. The guy took out a black cat to stop the blood that was flowing from his wound. He understood that despite his help, this black cat did not have long to live, but the little kitten was happy. After all, it was clear that the code was miraculously still alive. A small kitten was jumping around him and asking his daddy if he was okay. It was very difficult for the black cat to say anything, much less move. He was sweating. Well, despite all his efforts, he still petted his little white kitten. The guy stood aside and watched this picture. It was clear that the father loved his son very much. The kitten was lying on the ground, his father was stroking him with his paw, and the kitten was saying a big thank you for the guy curing his father. The guy picked up his helmet and said that was enough and put it on his head for him to pass. He turned around and headed towards the forest. He said that he was leaving and they should take care of themselves. He thought that was all. He would take the carcass of the ras and would return. The guy turned his head one way and then the other way. What was his surprise when he saw only the severed head and did not understand where the carcass of this monster had gone. At that moment, the little kitten ran to the guy and said that he had stopped there. The kitten jumped up and pushed him aside, while he shouted that they were in danger here. The guy lowered his head and looked at the little kitten hanging on him, not understanding what was going on. But the very next moment he felt how the tail of that same twisted creature hit him with all its force from behind. The blow was so strong that the guy couldn't stay on his feet and was thrown back, hitting a tree. When he was able to come to his senses, he could understand what it was and how this could have happened. The very next moment he saw that the very body of the monster that lay without a head stood in front of him, and instead of a head there were shining branches. He couldn't believe his eyes. Could it really be that same Viverna whose head he had cut off? But there was even more surprise when this monster not only but also was able to move at an even greater speed. The guy, watching everything that was happening, realized that this day was full of surprises. Viverna rose into the sky and then suddenly began to attack the guy, trying to damage him. The black cat couldn't rest and decided that he had to intervene in what was happening. The black cat jumped right in front of the guys and concentrated his powers, putting up a protective field, repelling the monster's attack. At that moment the little kitten couldn't hold back and screamed at his dad with all his might. The guy, watching everything that was happening, understood that this was some kind of madness. Therefore, he made the only right decision for himself, that it was dangerous and that it needed to be ended. He pulled his hand out and pressed the trigger, but his gun didn't fire. He was a little upset because the weapon golem was out of order and he had to decide what to do next. At that moment, the little kitten came up to his father and said that he was also ready to help him in the fight against this monster. The little kitten meowed several times and concentrated to gain strength. He even closed his eyes while he told himself several times that he needed to concentrate. After which the kitten turned around and screamed at the guy to help him, otherwise his father could be killed. But what was the surprise of the little kitten when he realized that the guy was missing? So the little kitten cried out how he could just run away at the very moment when his help was needed more than ever. It was at this moment that the little kitten managed to concentrate his forces and direct them towards the enemy. But he was just learning to do this, which is why after he struck the enemy, he was thrown back. When the kitten fell to the ground, he exhaled and gasped several more times. At that moment he saw how this huge monster grabbed his dad with its paws, and this monster squeezes him with all his might from the father of the black cat so that blood flows from the mouth. The little white kitten at that moment thought that he should never be afraid of anything. But he was still very scared and he could not contain his emotions in any way. After which the kitten raised his head up and began to meow from what he saw. He was very surprised. The guy he thought had escaped was sitting on the monster's head and holding onto the branches sticking out of his body. He was screaming that they needed to be pulled out by the roots. The kitten calmed down a little at that moment and thought that he also needed help. He didn't need to be afraid and he needed to concentrate. He decided that at that moment he had to save his dad and he could do it. The guy tore a few branches off the monster's body, but that wasn't really enough to stop it. The monster continued to move anyway. It seemed that this was not the issue at all. This monster threw the guy aside with all its might because it was much stronger. After the guy was thrown aside and landed on the ground, I realized that this had to end. Vivan stood over a black cat that was no longer moving or lying in a pool of blood. The guy understood that it was not enough that he would break the branches sticking out instead of a head. Holding the fragments in his hands, he suddenly realized that it was most likely Mana. And this little kitten that stands right in front of him, he swallows her up too. The kitten ran forward. He thought that he had succeeded. He really succeeded and he was able to use magic. As he got closer to this monster, he realized that it was only with such strength that he could save his dad. Then this little kitten L1 opened his mouth and directed all his power towards the monster. The blow was really made with great force and this monster could not resist. The guy at that moment only had time to look up at how high this monster was thrown. The force with which this little kitten struck that monster was so great that it could be seen from afar. The little kitten was able to cope with this huge monster by concentrating all his strength. After this happened, the kitten rushed to his dad. He screamed that he had done it. His dad lay and looked at his little kitten, although it was already difficult for him to do so. The kitten ran up to him and told his father that he had defeated this huge monster too. The black cat thought that his little kitten was a good boy. He could barely hold back his gaze. He tried to tell his father that they now needed to run away, but his father could hardly see him anymore. The only thing the black cat was thinking about at that moment was how quickly he had grown up and he wanted to tell him a lot. If he had believed in him from the beginning, then maybe everything would have turned out differently. The black cat, with the last of his strength, raised his paw, placed it on the kitten's head and stroked him. And then he told the little kitten that he was very amazing and put his paw down. The last thing the black cat said to the little kitten was that he was a wonderful cat. The kitten tried to talk to him for a while. Even he tried to use the magic he possessed to revive his dad, but it didn't work. The guy stood from the side and watched as this little kitten tried to heal with magic, but it was too late. When the kitten realized this, he became very upset and started crying. He didn't know what to do next. He sat for some time next to the body of the black cat, which lay in a huge pool of blood. At some point, a guy came up and grabbed this little white kitten by the collar. The guy told him that it was enough. In fact, the kitten understood perfectly well that his dad had already died. And the little kitten also understands that this black cat died protecting him. The little kitten didn't like these words very much. He even took offense at the guy for such words. So the little kitten started screaming why he was talking like that and how could he even do that. He started calling him a fool and a blockhead. The kitten started telling the guy to leave and he would stay with his dad forever. The guy grabbed this kitten and squeezed it hard so that its brains would fall into place. And then he told the kitten that if he stayed, the monsters would tear him apart. And did he really want his father's death to be in vain? At that moment the kitten thought and meowed very sweetly. It seemed that he understood what he was talking about. Then the guy suggested to the kitten that he go with him. At least he could help him survive and teach him how to use his power. When the kitten heard this proposal, he asked again if it was true. The guy answered him that of course it was true and he shouldn't doubt it. And he also said that when the kitten calms down, he can always return to this place. Only fools cry all the time. They buried the cat and took the body of Wyvern. As they walked, the guy introduced himself and said his name was Hawk and asked the kitten to say his name. The kitten said that his dad called him and his son, but no one else addressed him in any way. The guy replied that it wasn't a name at all and he had to figure out what his name would be. Then the little white kitten said that Daddy said that he was a very wonderful cat. The guy replied that this is not a name either. It only characterizes him as a good cat. The kitten didn't understand. Isn't he wonderful? Because his dad died because of him. He didn't understand anything. Then the little kitten thought for a bit and said that the guy should just call him a cat. From that moment on he was just a cat, and they walked up to the gates of the fortress while they talked. They arrived in the kingdom of Garnet, the city of Phrygia. The inhabitants of this city were very surprised because they saw a hunter. He was walking down the street and asking them to let him pass. He had a kitten on one shoulder and on the other side he was dragging a wyvern behind him. People were very upset about this stench. Some did not understand why he did not cast a spell against decay. The hunter continued walking along the city, asking passers-by for forgiveness for the inconvenience caused by this stench. A person from the outside was watching all this. He thought that this couldn't be in that hawk. In that case, his plans would change. The hunter walked to the store where they sold cut meat. The store was already closed. Inside this shop there was a man working. He was chopping meat with a huge axe at a cutting table. When the seller heard a knock on the door, he replied that his store was already closed and would only open tomorrow. Despite this, the door of this room slowly opened. The owner of the establishment turned his head and looked. He was interested to know who this Novets was who dared to go inside despite the fact that his store was closed. It was Hawk. He turned to the owner Gunther and said that it was him and that he shouldn't swear here. Gunther replied to Hawk that a week had already passed and he was wondering if he had managed to catch it. Hawk replied that no, but he was able to shoot something much larger and showed the head of a wyvern. Gunther replied to the guy that he didn't understand how he managed to complicate everything so much and that he would have to get rid of the mascara. I looked at the same one. He said that he could help with the wyvern and looked at the guy. Then the owner of this establishment said that Hawk was taking an unusually long time with this matter. Hawk didn't answer him. A small white kitten was sleeping on his hand. Gunther looked at the guy and said that he was of course just a format and it was not for him to judge. But the city has been unsettled lately and there are rumors of an impending war between the kingdoms, and they could become reality if he drags out this matter. Hawk said that he knew everything, but he couldn't find a trace in the forest. Gunther then said that it looked like the information was incorrect and he would collect new data, after which he handed over a photograph and told Hawk to take it. This is how he was last seen. In the photo was Sirius and he was a traitor and the kingdom of Topaz needed to eliminate him. Gunther said that cutting up the wyvern would take some time. The guy said that he didn't care at all. He could leave him 2 claws and take the rest. Then the owner of this establishment said that he understood everything and he would do it in a moment, took his axe and began to chop off 2 claws. After which Gunther raised his head, looked at the guy and asked him, by the way, what is this here that is with him, and he holds it in his hands. The guy answered him that it is just a cat. After some time they arrived at a place where they could rest peacefully. On the huge bed that stood right next to the window, on the pillow next to Slim, lay a small kitten. He hadn't slept so well for a long time. When he opened his eyes it seemed to him that everything around was wonderful. But when he stood up, like any little kitten, he started calling for his dad. Then he remembered everything that had happened just recently and that his father was no longer alive. Tears rolled from his eyes. At that moment the kitten came up to the helmet and started calling Hawk. He thought that he was sleeping here with him. Well, when this metal helmet rolled to the side, the kitten realized that there was no guy there. And this upset the kitten even more. He thought that Hawk had also died, just like his dad. At that moment Hawk answered the kitten that no, he didn't die. The kitten was a little confused, turned his head and saw a guy sitting at the table. Hawk told him that these are just clothes that are earned in the shape of the body, he does not sleep on the bed. The kitten asked why he didn't do it because it was so soft and he slept so well on it. Then the guy answered him that this is considered his professional habit. The kitten didn't quite understand what he was talking about and what professional habit meant, so he asked again. At that moment, the guy was sitting at the table and fixing his uniform, which at some point broke. He wanted to understand why this happened at the very moment he decided to use it. The guy sorted through one part after another and realized that it didn't break. All this was due to the complete depletion of mana. At that moment a kitten climbed onto the table, looked at the guy and asked what it was. Hawk answered the kitten that this is a cell, namely, a device for storing mana. The guy replied that this cell needs to be installed to revive the weapon golem. After he inserted this cell, a click was heard and the weapon golem was revived. The guy was happy because it was great, everything worked. Even the kitten was a little surprised. Hawk thought that it was out of order. Apparently the reason was the evaporation of mana and also in this cat. The kitten walked up to the weapon golem device and stood on top of it with its two paws. Hawk ordered the kitten to stop torturing the golem immediately and at that moment he took it away from the kitten. After which the guy told the kitten that he should go with him because they needed to visit one place. The kitten turned around, looked at the guy and asked again what place they needed to visit. They were heading to the Hunters Guild, an organization founded by mages and merchants to effectively hunt dangerous monsters and magical creatures that operate outside the borders of the state. The most important thing is that hunters from all countries were registered in this guild, which provided them with all-round support. The main privilege is the right to freely cross borders, the ability to introduce hunting regardless of state borders. Most adventurers become hunters precisely for this privilege and he was no exception. Corrected. Although he was called for other services for the first time and he was interested in what else they could offer him. He was met by a girl at the guild who immediately asked him if he wanted to register a familiar. Hawk looked around and said yes, but why was there no one in the guild? The girl replied that taming magical creatures is rare. The guy held the cat out in front of him and said that it was the cat that held him by the scruff of the neck. Hawk also said that they lived together and it seems that he is a magical creature. The kitten asked him again what he was doing. The girl was very surprised because the kitten also spoke. The girl also said that even without checking it is clear that this is a magical creature, but formalities must be observed and asked for understanding. She also asked what the baby's name was. She sat him down in front of her and stroked him. Hawk answered the girl that his name is just a cat, that's the name he came up with for himself. After which the girl took the device that was standing on her table and brought it closer to the little kitten. After which she put this device on the kitten's body and began to say that he had a very cute name, just a cat. The kitten didn't like this whole procedure and he started saying that it wasn't necessary to do it. The girl said that he had to be patient for a bit and it would all end soon. Hawk replied that there was no registered magical creature, it was a first-rank hunting target, and without registration he will have to open a hunt for the little kitten, since he will be his target. The girl got indignant and started screaming, "Why is he talking like that? He's scaring the kitten and he shouldn't interfere. Step aside." The guy said that he only wanted to help, but he didn't say anything. He actually turned around and walked away and went to the window. When he looked out the window, he suddenly saw something flying outside the window. The very next moment, this object broke the glass of the window near which Hawk was standing. Hawk ducked and wondered if she had fallen. The girl didn't understand what had happened to the window. Then the guy turned around and saw that it was just a stone. He thought that meant there were two possible options. The first option is someone's stupid prank. The second option was a deliberate attempt to lure him out. He raised his eyes and saw a guy standing on the roof of the opposite house. He was very surprised because he did not expect to see him in the city and did not expect that he would be the one to lure him out. Hawk got ready, he was very surprised, he didn't know what to do next and how to act. Hawk was surprised only because Sirius, the teacher, was standing in front of him at that moment, and memories surfaced in his mind. That was when he was still a very little boy and the teacher tried to teach him something. But he couldn't do anything and very often because of this he was powerless and couldn't resist. The teacher then told the boy that he still had not gotten rid of the habits of military training and blindly rushing at the enemy is not their way. Hawk, despite the pain, said he would try again. Then the teacher told him well and first he should think about the situation and then act. Only in this way he can become a Death Knight. Hawk was not going to give up even then. He was ready to train for a long time to achieve his goal and extended his hand to take the sword. Hawk extended his hand to raise himself up. He thought of his teacher, and that it seems he is still too weak. At that moment he raised his head and looked out the broken window. The girl kept asking questions about what had happened and he found the attacker. She was interested in the question of whether she would have to pay compensation for the damage. Hawk at that moment grabbed the kitten by the twist and tore it out of her hands. The girl said that she needed to look at the results. Hunter Hawk was not going to wait for the result. He was already moving very quickly towards the exit. He had a kitten in his arms. Hawk, if anything, it would be easier for him to go out the broken window. For this he accelerated and jumped out. The girl, when she saw everything that was happening, could not believe her eyes. Then she said that the results were already ready. She looked at the button that lit up. It was red and she was very surprised. The girl said that this can't be. This cat is not a magical creature at all. Well, no one heard all this anymore, because Hawk released his golem so that it would attach itself to a pipe on the roof. When he got a firm grip, the guy realized that he could rise up in the situation. In just a few seconds he was on the very roof where he saw his teacher Sirius. The two hunters stood opposite each other. Hawk did not leave the little kitten out of his arms for a second. Teacher Sirius said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time and he came to talk to him. Hawk asked his teacher again why he decided to show himself at this particular moment. Teacher Sirius replied that if he had known earlier that it was he who was hunting him, he would not have hidden. Hawk looked at the teacher and said, "Is he really making fun of him and telling him this on purpose?" Teacher Sirius said that he completely trusts his student no matter what. Hawk didn't understand how the teacher could give the kingdom of Topaz and also the kings of death. Teacher Sirius answered him that he keeps this cat with him and does not understand anything. Then he turned to the guy and said that the kingdom of Topaz, he tried to explain everything to him. But one sharp arrow did not let him do this. It pierced his throat right through. After one arrow flew in, many more arrows were moving in his direction. Hawk the next moment blocked another arrow that was supposed to hit his teacher. Hawk didn't understand what it was and whether there were archers somewhere nearby. Or are there other killers and was it all planned from the very beginning? Hawk turned his head and looked up to see an archer standing on one of the pipes. It was a girl who held a bow in her hands and was ready to shoot again. She asked the guy if he was really protecting Sirius. After which the girl, looking straight at him, said that as expected he was also ready to become a traitor to the Death Knights. Hawk tried to tell her that this was all wrong and that she had completely misunderstood everything. The archer said that she was not going to listen to his excuses, she would simply destroy him. Death Knights is the name of an elite squad of assassins reporting directly to the King of Topaz. This unit exists as an unofficial part of the state structure, remaining in the shadows. The only task of this unit is to eliminate enemies. State of Topaz. Hawk repels the arrows fired at him. The archer tried to stay on the roof of this house. Teacher Sirius understood that he had been seriously injured and took out a candle with a red wick, after which he lit the candle so that it would burn with the help of her and his power. He was able to pull out the arrow that pierced him. He thought that for a murderer he was fighting too noisily. The teacher also concluded that his student had not changed at all during the entire time he had not seen him. The kitten sitting in Hawk's arms climbed onto his shoulder and said that he wanted to help him. The guy told him to sit still. His opponent at that moment pulled out 3 more arrows and was ready to launch them at him. At that moment, the teacher thought that it was time to finish and that this would definitely attract the attention of the guild. In fact, he appeared in this place specifically because he wanted to explain everything to him, but he didn't have time left. So he looked at his student again and asked him for forgiveness when his student attacked the archer. The archer was already at that moment pulling the string in order to shoot in his direction. She jumped up so that Hawk's attack would not be less successful, while she herself took an advantageous position. She jumped up and was thus able to fire 3 arrows at once from top to bottom at her target, which is what she did the next moment. Hawk only managed to raise his head and see that he was being attacked from above. With one blow of his sword he was able to deflect all 3 arrows heading his way, after which the archer landed right in front of him. He was ready to strike again. When the archer landed and looked around, she was very surprised because Sirius had disappeared. The girl was so surprised, not understanding how this happened and whether this man was really a magician. Hawk at this moment took advantage of the fact that she was confused and tried to attack her. He stepped forward, stabbed with his sword, and then released the golem straight at the archer. When the golem approached her, it released its wings and it seemed that at any moment it could board her. And so it happened. He grabbed her hand several times so that she couldn't go anywhere. After that, Hawk pulled himself towards himself. He realized that the archer was already in his hands. Even the little white kitten sitting on his shoulders raised his head and watched everything that was happening. The archer couldn't resist, so she went down. She couldn't do anything. As soon as she fell down and landed on the ground, Hawk swung his sword trying to deal her a fatal blow. Hawk controlled her in 2 directions. On one side he held her with the help of the golem. On the other side he also struck her. Hawk turned to the girl. Her name was Rena. He told her to calm down and be quiet. He tried to explain to her that Teacher Sirius was trying to tell him something very important and he had to hear it. Rena acted as if she didn't hear him. She continued asking him what was so important he could have said and where is this Sirius now. He really didn't have an answer to these questions in Sirius. When he raised his head he was already gone. Hawk pressed the girl even harder and asked her where she hid him. Rena answered him that he was the first to notice it. At the bottom of the building, people remained to gather and watch what was happening on the roof. Hawk noticed that they were being watched and commented on. He then said that they needed to change the environment, and the most suitable option for further communication was that same butcher shop. After some time they were sitting at the table. Hawk tried to explain to the girl that he had told her more than once that he was not a traitor. The owner of this establishment said that it was enough to talk about it and that they just needed to have some tea. Then he looked at the guy and asked in surprise if he had really missed Sirius. Hawk what to him, and most likely some new information may appear. The owner of this establishment then suggested to him that he simply give in and that would be the end of it. Rena jumped up from her seat and started shouting at the old man, asking if he had gone completely crazy. Hawk looked at the owner of the establishment and wondered why he was talking about this so confidently. Then the owner of the establishment told them to look at the newspaper that came out that morning and showed them this newspaper. When the guy picked up the newspaper, he read what was written there, and it said that the kingdom of Topaz had fallen. The girl couldn't hold back, she was furious. She asked again what they were saying. Then the owner of this establishment began to tell that a glowing tree grew through the palace and attracted monsters. They say that after a couple of days this place became uninhabitable. When Hawk heard about the glowing log, he realized that he had seen the same glowing log somewhere before. The owner of the establishment said that he no longer has any rights to those who are traitors if the state no longer exists. And then he added that he could kill himself and start a new life if they had no one else to hunt. The owner of the establishment said that, for example, you can get a cat, and looked at the little kitten who was shaking all over and asked again what was wrong with him. Hawk looked at his little kitten and also asked him if he was okay. The kitten was very upset and said that it was all Andreev's owner and he and his dad ran to this place to escape from him. Hawk didn't understand what he meant and who the master of the dream was, but he understood that it was he who had done all this. The girl abruptly put her hands on the table. She was not prepared for such a turn of events. She said that she had to see it with her own eyes, and for that she decided that she needed to go back to headquarters. She asked what Hawk would do. The guy thought for a bit because he actually didn't know yet what he would do next. At that moment someone knocked on the door of the store. The owner of the store turned his head and looked at the door. Then he went to the door, opened it and said that they were already closed. The man who was standing on the other side said that it was a bit early that they closed. The store owner said he had a reason for this and asked the man again what he wanted. The man took out his guild card and showed it to the owner of the establishment. Then he introduced himself and said that his name was Lucas. He was a guild investigator and they could spare him some time. The store owner asked again why such a person came to his store. The investigator said that he had nothing to do with this establishment. He had completely different goals. Then the investigator suddenly shouted loudly so that everyone inside could hear. He asked Hawk if he was there. Then the investigator handed over a piece of paper and said that this was a bill for damage to the guild's property and this was for repairing the doors. The guy went out and took the bill. The owner of the establishment didn't understand what he was doing there. The investigator said that he also brought what they left behind and if they want, they can get it right now. Hawk didn't understand what he had left behind, so he asked the investigator what it was. Well, since he was very curious, he decided that he was ready to get it right now. The investigator turned around, walked forward and told Hawk to follow him. He walked very quickly. Rena also left this establishment and decided that she should also follow them. And without losing sight of them, she moved a little to the side so that they would not notice her. Hawk, when he saw her, waved his hand to make her stop and come back as quickly as possible. The girls had no choice but to actually obey Hawk's order. She stopped, turned around and started moving in the opposite direction. But she really wanted to know what would happen next. Hawk looked up and saw her go back. He calmed down and continued to follow the investigator. While Hawk was walking behind the investigator, he thought that they were going to some wilderness. The investigator approached a cart standing in the middle of the road and said that he was ready to give him everything that was inside. Hawk told him that it might sound strange, but in fact he didn't leave anything. Then the investigator walked up to the cart, pulled out a huge box and said that first they needed to check. When he started to pull out the box, the guy at that moment caught himself thinking that it looked very much like an ordinary coffin. The investigator is corrupt and says that, as he has already guessed, there is a human body inside this box. Hawk, when he saw that they were starting to open the coffin, he was proud of himself for thinking that this couldn't be. After all, it was actually the body of his teacher, and Sirius. It is unclear how it got to this place. Hawk swung the ball to hit the investigator. He wanted to expose. The investigator turned around, looked at him and said that it would be stupid to kill him in this place. Hawk didn't understand what was going on at all. He looked at this investigator trying to get at least some kind of answer. The investigator then asked him if he wasn't curious about how his teacher Sirius died. Hawk seemed not to hear what was being said to him. He wanted to deal with this guy. Let's get angry, jump back, try to defend myself, but the hunter was resolutely Nostra. Hawk took a few steps forward and began to attack. He swung his sword and also threw out the golem to capture. The investigator told the guy that he should listen to him and not fight at all. Well, if he continues to behave like this, then in that case he leaves him no choice, and he also said that he is not at all confident in controlling his powers. Investigators concentrated his power on the candle while he asked his opponent not to die and then struck. The blow was really strong and Hawk was thrown back for a moment. The investigator, having used his force, could not even imagine that the blow would be so strong. The horses that were slaughtered in the cart could not restrain themselves and began to neigh loudly in fear. The investigator looked at everything that had happened and thought, well, this guy deserves such treatment. He also now knew that this Hawk was more emotional than he thought at the beginning of their conversation. Hawk was thrown so far at this point that he landed near the first tree that stopped him. Hawk didn't like this at all, so he told his kitten to stay away from the showdown. After which the kitten asked the guy if the person in the box was dear to him. Hawk, without thinking, immediately answered him that no. It seemed that not a single movement on his face twitched. The kitten then asked the guy again, he doesn't understand, then why is he angry? Hawk put the kitten on the ground and told him that it was none of his business. The kitten said that he also wanted to help him. Hawk told him that this was his problem that he had to solve on his own. The kitten basically disagreed with him. He said that no, it was his problem too. Hawk took off his helmet and covered the kitten with it so that he would not interfere in the showdown. After which the guy looked at my kitten and said that he really asks him to be kind and behave quietly. The kitten did not agree with this behavior of his new friend. He meowed very loudly and wanted to get out. Hawk, after he hid the kitten, turned and looked at the investigator. The investigator in turn asked the guy if this really meant he was not in the mood to talk. Hawk interrupted him and told him to shut up. He didn't want to hear any excuses from him. The investigator then said that he was very sorry for concentrating fireballs with his candle and directed them towards the guy, after which he sent several more fireballs in his direction. Hawk was ready for this. With one blow he parried one of the attacks and then dodged the second fireball. Hawk did not let these fireballs get close to him and smash them. Dodging one attack, he would the next moment break the next fireball and dodge the next attack. The investigator did not stop attacking the guy. He again concentrated with force and continued his attack. This time he fired a huge fire arrow at Hawk that was supposed to pierce him. Hawk resource he can't stop he with the help of Golem, which he released forward to neutralize the blow. In this way he stops another attack of his opponent and gets away from it. Hawk looked at his opponent, at the investigator, asking what he would do this time. Everything turned out to be much simpler. His opponent jumped up and kicked Hawk right in the chest, throwing him aside. Hawk fell back and rolled over on the ground a few more times because the blow was really strong. Hawk, after stopping, leaned on one of his arms and began to rise. The kitten tried very hard and managed to turn the helmet over despite the fact that he was so small. The kitten looked at the situation from the outside and he didn't like the situation very much since Hawk wasn't in the best position. The kitten understood that the guy told him to sit quietly, but he couldn't allow himself to do that when he was watching what was happening. At that moment he remembered his dad lying on the ground and how he didn't help him in any way. The kitten thought that if he hesitated, his new friend Hawk might also die like his father. At that moment he realized that he definitely didn't want this, so the kitten rushed to help his friend. The investigator or he concentrated his strength in order to strike the next blow. And when he started attacking with a fire arrow, Hawk had not yet managed to rise and it could have ended badly for him. The kitten was already nearby. The kitten made it in time. He stood up and stayed with the full force of the blow. The investigator looked at his weapon and thought that it was very surprising because this cat absorbs mana. The cat was just standing in front of Hawk at that moment. He was absorbing 2 mana from both sides at once. Code shouted at the two that he would not let anyone die so he could protect everyone with his power. Hawk looked at the cat and thought that now his golem was useless because all the mana that was absorbed in it. Hawk was very surprised because the cat absorbed mana of 2 colors at once, red and green. It seemed that the enemy also lost his magic. Hawk thanked the cat and headed forward. He was still determined about his opponent. The investigator understood that this might not be the end of it and that they would still have to engage in close combat. Hawk thought that in close combat he had at least a small chance and he was ready for it. The investigator believed that he would be able to win in close combat, so he was prepared for such a turn of events. Hawk couldn't stop, so he decided to attack first and strike first. But they simultaneously pushed off, jumped up and began to attack each other. The very next moment it was as if 2 huge hands consisting of the forces of their mana grabbed them and began to hold them. After which they laid both of them on the ground and pressed them down from above so that they could not move. All this power was controlled by a little cat who told them that they just had enough. Hawk asked him what he was doing. Then the cat told Hawk that this man just wanted to talk and they just needed to listen to him. The investigator said that everything was correct. Hawk had no choice but to obey what the code said and listen to this guy lying in front of him. Of course it was very difficult for him to agree with this. He even closed his eyes. After which he opened and said that okay, he is ready to listen to this guy. The code can let them go. Then the investigator said that he moved to this place at the request of Sirius. He also added that he asks him to accept this as a manifestation of concern for them who are in ignorance and confusion. Hawk department to find out from the investigator how he is connected with his teacher Sirius, that he knows so much about him. The investigator responded that he was in fact the informant Sirius. Hawk, although it was hard to believe, had no choice but to listen to him to the end. God saw that there was fermentation between them again. He said that they should not start fighting under any circumstances. Hawk replied that he didn't even think the cat that was between the two of them was calming them down. The investigator said that it all started with the study of magical creatures in the kingdom of Topaz. Then he took out and showed a picture and said that this picture depicted the key object of the study, the parasitic magical creature, the world tree. When the world tree is parasitized, even an ordinary person gains so much magical power that he can cast spells. However, the carrier loses his personality and becomes a puppet of the tree. He is completely in its power. The Kingdom of Topaz tried to create a magical weapon using this feature. Death Knights, various magical creatures and monsters participated in the experiment. Hawk listened carefully to every word he said. He couldn't even imagine that such a thing could happen. The investigator continued to say that all the test subjects infected with the world tree lost their essence. Only Sirius, being a magician, retained his sanity and escaped. Perhaps he did it because of his immunity. Hawk find out how the investigator can prove that the photos are genuine. The investigator said that at the moment he really can't prove it in any way, but he can check it himself. That's why he brought Sirius' body. Hawk didn't understand what he meant. The investigator said that he initially planned to hand over all the information and commit suicide before losing himself. Hawk was even more confused. If he had immunity, then why did his teacher decide that he needed to resort to suicide? The guy closed his eyes and said that his immunity was incomplete, which is why he made this decision. He then added that he intended to find a way to heal using the guild's technology, but Master Sirius refused. Hawk was completely confused. He didn't understand why Sirius did it and why he refused. Then the guy stood up, extended his other hand forward and pointed his index finger straight at him. At the same time, he said that Sirius did it because of him, because of his student Hawk. Hawk grabbed the investigator by the clothes and started shouting, "Does he really want to say that he is to blame for Sirius's death?" The cat shouted that it was not necessary. The guy started to tell that Hawk was actually the killer chasing Sirius. That is why he planned to die at his hands so that he would not be considered a traitor to the squad. When Hawk heard about this, he let go of his interlocutor. He realized that the teacher did all this precisely because of him. He sat down next to the box where his teacher's body was and said that Sirius had sacrificed himself before him. Everything he heard was very painful for him and he didn't want to believe it at all. But at some point, it was as if an epiphany had appeared in his head. He couldn't even imagine it. He looked at the cat and asked him why he came to this place with his dad. Then the year answered him that they were running away from the owner of the tree who wanted to kill them. At that moment, Hawk thought that this very owner of the tree was the main culprit who should answer for everything. It was this tree owner who planted the world tree, used the knights as guinea pigs, and killed the black cat. It became clear to him that if he killed this bastard, then everything that had happened recently could end. The investigator said that these are too hasty conclusions. This is not a solution to the problem, but rather retribution, and besides, no one knows who the owner of the tree is. Hawk then asked the investigator, he says it as if he himself knows who the owner of the tree is. The investigator said, "Isn't it obvious? This is the one who can grow a world tree in the very center of the royal palace and use death knights as guinea pigs." He lowered his eyes, then raised them and looked at the guy and said that it was the king of Topaz himself. At that moment, Hawk said that he already understood everything, but he didn't understand what to do next. The investigator then said, "Don't death knights obey the king?" Hawk answered him that the Death Knights only eliminate enemies in the Kingdom of Topaz, and he also said that the Death Knights destroy those who destroyed the country, but now his target is the king himself. The investigator said that with his abilities it was unlikely that he had forgotten how he had just almost died at his hands. Hawk picked up the cat's land holding it in one hand. He said that with this cat everything is now possible. Then he looked at the cat and said, does he remember that he said that he would help direct his power to something important, and that important thing would be that they would save the world from the owner of the tree. A very small white kitten looked at Hawk and asked again if they could really save the world. The investigator also asked the guy if he really wanted to save the world, but the fall of the Topaz Kingdom could have been just an accident. The investigator asked Hawk again if he shouldn't just be protecting the king. Hawk answered him, after the Death Knights became guinea pigs, the king betrayed his knights. And if the fall of the Kingdom of Topaz was not accidental, then there may be even worse consequences. It is very likely that the owner of the Dry is capable of destroying other kingdoms. The investigator said that all this sounds like an excuse for revenge, and he also added that it is not necessary to understand this and he can act as he knows. After which the investigator said that if he had handed everything over, then he would leave. Hawk asked him to stop. Hawk asked the guy if he was really going to leave it right there. The investigator responded that he had originally intended to use the body and the photographs to reveal the existence of the world tree, but now everyone knows about it. Hawk did not understand whether he was refusing information for such a reason. Because of this, the reliability of the information would most likely fall. The guy turned to Mr. Hawk and told him that caution was good, but he wasn't going to deceive him and he wouldn't give up the information because only he and Sirius knew about the world tree. If they bring this to the guild at the moment, they and Hawk will only get into trouble, so he suggested that he use all this for survival. Hawk, when he heard such an answer, was a little puzzled. He did not know how to proceed further and what to do. He stopped this guy because he wanted to ask something else that was bothering him. The guy stopped and asked him again what else he wanted to know, because in fact he had already told everything. Hawk then asked the boy about what his teacher Siri found out about the cat and what kind of cat it was. The guy was a little surprised by this question. Did he really take this cat with him without knowing anything about it? Then the guy took out another photo and said that judging by the photo, this cat was also one of the test subjects. Hawk looked at the cat sitting on his shoulder and said, if he is also a test subject, does that mean the world tree is already parasitizing on him? Hawk was very upset because he understood that this cat would meet the same end as Sirius. He looked at this Bigo and thought that then, like Sirius, he would have to die soon. The guy looked at him and replied that this cat was not infected and the world tree does not parasitize on him. Hawk was very surprised, but he asked the guy how he knew this. Then the guy replied that he actually began to sprout a tree from the infected creature. A person can hide it under clothes, but it is unbearable for an animal. He said that nothing like that can be seen on the cat's body, and this all means that the cat's abilities are not at all like a tree. The guy also added that the Topaz Kingdom actually studied not only the world tree, but they tried to turn various magical creatures into weapons. Hawk was even more surprised when he heard about the magical weapon. Could this little cat really be such a magical weapon? The guy then added that he thought this cat could be one of them and that he most likely had unusual abilities. Then this guy added that he has such special abilities that he wants to take possession of them. When Hawk heard this last phrase, he couldn't hold back and immediately took a fighting stance. After all, this cat was already a part of his life and he couldn't allow anyone to take possession of his abilities. The guy at that moment turned around and said that it was just a joke and he was only fulfilling Sirius' request and did not want him to die. After which he turned around and began to slowly walk away, while he said that he was deviating from this and needed to find the runaway cart. Hawk still wanted to ask a few questions because he didn't want to meet this guy again. But Hawk understood that this guy really helped him a lot by providing him with all the information and all the photos. Now he had to understand what to do and most importantly tell Mr. Gunther and Rena about all this. Would they be able to believe him? He decided that if he lays out everything honestly, just as he was told, then perhaps they will be able to believe him or, on the contrary, suspect him of betrayal, and suddenly things will only get worse. At that moment he put his iron helmet on his head and decided unequivocally that he would not share the information. He will return to headquarters with the body, complete the mission and dispel suspicions, find the source of all the problems, and then, the little cat interrupted him and said that the most important thing for him was family and looked at him very tenderly. Hawk looked at the kitten and asked him again what he was suddenly talking about. He didn't understand. The little cat said that he considers Hawk his family after his dad's death. Hawk said that they had known each other for less than 3 days. The little cat replied that it was true, but Hawk was there when he was going through hard times and supported him, so he considers him his family. Hawk didn't know how to react to this, so he didn't answer anything. The little cat turned to him again and asked Hawk what was most important to him. The boy thought about this question. The cat continued to say that he doesn't want to lose something that is very dear to him again, so if Hawk also has something valuable, he wants to help him. At that moment, Hawk thought that he had never thought about this and didn't know exactly how to answer him, because his words could determine whether the cat would stay with him. The only thing he understood for sure was that he couldn't let the cat go, so he started saying that knights were important to him and that they could be in danger of death and he wanted to save his comrades. At that moment he thought that was enough. Well, then he decided that maybe he should have said that he wanted to save the world. The cat then answered him that everything was clear to him and that he would help him. Then he added that they should protect together what was dear to them. Hawk stroked the cat, said thank you very much and thought to himself that it worked. When he stroked it, he understood that he would have to be much more careful. The main thing at the moment was to maintain a relationship with the cat. He understood that if they met someone as strong as Wyvern, he wouldn't be able to do without the cat's abilities. Hawk asked the cat what then they should move to the kingdom of Topaz. Code gave him consent. In fact, Hawk had no idea, no matter what he said, the code would still remain, because Hawk had already become dear to him. That's just how it was from, and he could never leave Hawk no matter what. Hawk, with the cat sitting on one shoulder, walked and pulled a huge box behind them. After some time, in that same butcher shop where it had been quiet until that moment, someone knocked on the window. Inside this room there was a broken chair and a broken table lying around. The golem flew closer and creaked against the glass several times. I saw it and was very surprised, after which she opened the window and told him to come in. The golem went down and put a letter on the windowsill, after which he very quickly left this place. The girl saw the note and decided to read it. The notes were written about Hawk following Sirius' footsteps after the job. Mrs. would return to headquarters and his signature. She decided that he had simply left. After reading this note she thought that he was some kind of heartless, but she had prepared a surprise party for him by destroying his 2 friends. She put on that next time they would definitely meet. The golem completed its task, passed on the note and returned to its master. Hawk said that it was a good job, after which the golem returned to its place and creaked. Hawk looked ahead and said that they had to move on. They had no other choice. While Hawk was carrying a huge box, the cat was sleeping peacefully on his shoulder. After the cat opened his eyes he turned to Hawk. The guy asked if he was really awake. At that moment, something flew right over their heads, and the cat managed to see it very quickly. So he told his Hawk that it seemed there was something in this place. He asked again what exactly. It was for this reason that they stopped and began to look around. Hawk also caught himself thinking that he definitely felt a miracle about the presence and it was very close. He thought that Phrygia was not far from this place and maybe it was Rena who was following him. He looked again at his huge box that he was dragging behind him and realized only that whoever was chasing him in this place and whoever it was, he understood that there was no way to part ways peacefully. The first thing he did was charge his golem so that it would be in full combat readiness. The very next moment they heard loud footsteps approaching them and becoming louder and louder. At that moment, Hawk realized that his premonition had not failed him at all and that he had done the right thing by stopping. Because the next moment he saw that 3 goblins appeared in front of him, approaching him and ready to attack. Hawk didn't understand where the goblins could come from in this place and why they were attacking, but on the other hand, he thought that maybe it was for the best. At that moment, the golem creaked and prepared to attack. What he saw the next moment, he thought that this was not for the best at all. These goblins had glowing branches sticking out of their bodies. Hawk ordered the little cat to hold on tight as there would be a battle. The cat agreed with him and got ready. The golem attacked first. He flew out to distract the goblins' attention in another direction. He actually succeeded and these goblins started looking in different directions and got distracted. Only one of the goblins noticed the huge box that stood right in front of him. Hawk watched everything that was happening from the side. At that moment he understood that these goblins were parasites on the world tree. He also realized that they might have been tracking the cat that was on his shoulder. Hawk at that moment thought that this would be a good thing. He would be able to find out the limits of his abilities. Hawk turned and told the cat to hold off on magic. The cat didn't understand why. Then he explained that there was a last cell in golem and if the code used its magic, they would be left without mana at all. At this point the deepening began to pick up speed and move after the golem. What to attack him with? Golem them just in the right place so that they would be ambushed by Hawk so that he could attack. The very next moment they were indeed ambushed and Hawk began to attack. He immediately struck the first goblin with his sword and was able to deal damage to him by throwing him aside. This goblin was unable to stand on its own legs and was thrown back to the side. After the goblin got back on all fours he was just furious. And instantly this goblin that attacked Hawk tried to attack him. Hawk didn't understand what was going on because there was something wrong here. He was trying to cut it in half. He didn't understand how goblins could have such tough skin that he couldn't damage it. One of these goblins was very close and a little more and he grabbed Hawk. That is why the young man did not stand up and think for long. He made the only right decision. He tried to kick his opponent to throw him back. To do this, he swung and hit the goblin with all his might, throwing him back. At that moment he ordered the golem to finish all the remaining work here. Namely, that he attacked the goblin who was thrown back by the golem NS. He was dealt a fatal blow. At that moment, a second goblin began to attack him from the other side, who saw what had happened. Hawk stepped on the string that was stretched to push off and jumped up. He needed to get away from the goblin's attack. The goblin at that moment hit the stone cliff with all his might. Hawk had no choice but to finish him off. He pulled out his sword and swung it back to strike. The next moment he dealt a powerful blow to the second goblin, destroying it. Hawk at this point thought he had managed to deal with 2. He still had one left. Hawk stood near a stone cliff, with 2 dead goblins lying on either side of him. The third and last Gogol was simply furious. He was growling with anger and ready to tear him to pieces. Hawk looked at this goblin and told him that he started to attack because he was ready for it. The goblin actually jumped up and started attacking him. The first guy swung and tried to block his attack with his sword. The force with which the goblin attacked was much more powerful and Hawk's sword could not withstand this force and it broke into small pieces. The goblin at that moment jumped to the side and prepared for the next attack. He stood opposite. Huge glowing branches were sticking out of his body. He was ready to attack. Hawk thought that he would have to use another weapon. The cat asked again what other weapon. Hawk told him that he had something in store. The goblin was not going to wait. He was ready to attack. Hawk crossed his arms and said that now the first test will be ready. At that moment the goblin launched an attack with all his might. It seemed that he was ready to tear the guy apart. At that moment the golem was catching up with him. As the goblin rapidly approached Hawk, golem circled around his neck several times, and the next moment he pulled several loops around his neck, thus stopping the goblin. Hawk took out his new blade and jumped up, cutting off the goblin's head, after which he landed down and the goblin extermination mission came to an end. The little cat said it was just amazing. The guy replied it was a wyvern blade that was made from her claw. Hawk at that moment looked at the last goblin and saw that his work was coming to life again. At that moment he thought that he had done it in vain and that he had cut his throat in vain. The goblin's body was ready to attack the guy again, and instead of a head there were glowing branches sticking out of it. Hawk swung back to deliver another blow with the blade, which was made from a wyvern claw. He swung, struck and partially damaged the branches sticking out of the goblin's body and also cut off his tail. Dangerous creatures are divided into monsters and magical creatures, such as his current opponent, the goblin. In addition to the fact that he was a monster up to a certain point, in this situation he became a magical creature. Hawk understood that in this case he would have to act completely differently. It was only necessary to understand what the main difference was between them, and it was precisely thanks to this difference that it was possible to defeat him. The goblin turned around once more and attacked Hawk. The blade he held in his hands crumbled into small pieces. Hawk was a little puzzled. He knew that he was not prepared for such a turn of events. He thought that initially monsters were deprived of magical abilities. This is what distinguished them from magical creatures. But this creature that was in front of him had mastered magic as if it was born with it. This meant that a monster infected by the world tree should be considered a magical creature. The little cat couldn't take it anymore and shouted that he was ready to protect Hawk from this magical creature. Hawk shouted to the cat to stop, but he didn't hear anything anymore. He was concentrating his power. The next thing the code did was direct all of its power towards the magical creature. This magical creature could not withstand such an attack as the little cat absorbed its mana. Within a few seconds, there was not a single trace left of this magical creature. Hawk was a little unprepared for this turn of events. He knew that in this case the golem would also be deprived of mana, and he also got very scared and rushed to look because there was something there that he was very worried about. There was the body of Sirius's teacher. He didn't understand what could have happened to him. The little cat sitting on Hawk's shoulder didn't understand why he ran to that place so quickly and asked him about it. When Hawk ran up, he said that this couldn't be, and the little cat answered that he just wanted to protect him. Hawk was most worried about Sirius' body, but he was very surprised because it remained unharmed. The little cat asked for forgiveness for using magic. When they got down to the box where Sirius' body was, the little cat and Hawk sat down and then looked at each other. Hawk was a little surprised, but he was also worried about the little cat, who once again showed what he was capable of. The little cat could not say anything in his defense. He only lowered his eyes and quietly meowed. Hawk broke the moment of silence. He said that ultimately he was grateful to him that he remained alive and thanked him. The little cat then was happy. It meant he did the right thing. Hawk looked at him sternly and answered him that no, he had reasons for this. The little cat then lowered his head again and meowed very quietly. Hawk tried to explain to him that because of his use of magic, the golem became useless and they almost lost Sirius' body. He also said that if this continues he will not be able to rely on him. The little cat asked for forgiveness. Hawk continued to look at him sternly and said that this is exactly why rules need to be established. The little cat raised his eyes, looked at the boy and asked again what the rules were. Hawk understood that Ku considered him family, which meant that he was most afraid of loneliness. He felt sorry for him, but in order to tame him he would have to take advantage of this weakness. That's why the guy said that he shouldn't use magic without his consent, and if he breaks the rules, he'll leave. The little cat listened attentively to the rules and said nothing, but only meowed. Hawk once again sternly repeated to him that otherwise their paths would diverge. The little cat thought and said that he understood everything and then added that then he also had something. And he also wants to establish rules. Hawk, we are very surprised by such behavior of the cat. So he asked again what exactly he wanted to propose in the rules. The little cat couldn't help himself and said that it would be fair if he also suggested some rules. Hawk didn't say anything else. He thought that even though he was a small cat, he was very mountainous and said that he agreed to listen to him. Then the little cat cried out that Hawk should always be with him, eat together and sleep together too, and he should never fight alone. Hawk answered him if the little cat would follow his rules they would be inseparable anyway and there was no need to turn this into rules. The cat insisted that this should also be a rule. Hawk thought he had to agree and told the little cat okay then now they will follow each other's rules. The little cat was pleased but he said that it was good that he would definitely and certainly follow all the rules. Hawk repeated to him once again that he must comply with them without fail and without fail. The guy thought that he had another problem. At that moment he looked at the box in which Sirius' body lay. He thought that since this body was not harmed by the cat's magic, this group was clearly unusual. Hawk walked up to the box and opened the lid and looked at the state of Sirius' body. It was unclear, but he decided that maybe it was the vets who were able to withstand the attack. Their shape resembled the stems that magicians use. And if his guess was correct, he decided that he needed to experiment. He turned to the cat and said that he had a request for him. The little cat was very surprised, but at the same time he was happy and asked again what the request was. Not far from this place a camp was set up where knights were located. One of them was in a hurry to report to the commander. When he ran into the tent, he shouted loudly to the commander that trouble had come. The commander, without turning his head, sat at the table and told him not to panic and explained. Then this knight answered him that it would be better for the commander to take a look at what was happening himself. The commander turned his head, not understanding what he meant, and asked him what exactly, after which the commander came out of his tent and actually looked at what was happening. He couldn't believe his eyes. In front of them was a huge cat that was taller than the trees and taller than the mountains. The commander said, "Is this really another mutant generated by the world tree?" After which he turned and asked investigator Lucas what he thought about this. The investigator was calm, but seeing the same thing, he replied that his head was spinning. After which the investigator added that most likely it is just a magical creature. The mutants' bodies are covered with sprouts of the world tree. The commander thought about it and actually saw that it was exactly like that, so he said that's it. After which the commander shouted to Sergeant Jackson. The sergeant immediately came to him. The commander ordered the sergeant to gather a squad. They will go after the magical creature. The sergeant replied yes. Investigator Lucas asked the commander if he was really going to hunt this huge cat. The commander replied that of course he was. The commander laughed and added, "Isn't he curious about how huge a magical stone could be hidden inside?" The investigator thought about it at that moment and said that it was really interesting. He then asked the commander for permission to join this hunt. The commander answered him without hesitation that of course and suggested that he go with them. The investigator thought that the situation was getting more complicated and all he could do was trust her. Shortly before the giant cat appeared, Hawk and the small cat were sitting and looking at Sirius' body. At that moment, Hawk thought about Sirius and whether he was really dead as he saw it. He knew perfectly well that until now all carriers after death were reborn in a stronger form. But why Sirius was not resurrected? There are some conditions, or is it because he did not cut off his head? Or maybe the reason for everything was the branches. They were able to resist magic. Their shape resembled the stems that magicians used. Hawk thought that he felt uneasy and he really wanted to get rid of them, and if his guess was correct. At that moment he looked at the little cat and said that he had a request for him. He was very happy. He was pleased that he would be able to fulfill Hawk's request. Hawk then said that he wanted the little cat to absorb the mana from the branches that surrounded Sirius. When the little cat heard the word devoured, he didn't understand what he was talking about, that he couldn't do that. When Hawk heard that the cat couldn't do it, he was very surprised, and the two of them looked at each other, not understanding each other. The cat didn't know what he needed to do. Hawk at that moment thought that it seemed like he was absorbing mana unconsciously without realizing what he was doing. Hawk then asked him how he usually used magic. The little cat answered that he simply imagined what he wanted to do, concentrated very, very hard, and whoosh, magic happened. The little cat said that when he was still with his dad, he couldn't do anything at all. Then he became happy and started shouting loudly that everything always works out for him and Hawk. At that moment, the guy in the hall grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up and held him like that for a few seconds. Then he put it on the lid of the box and told the little cat to try using magic, thinking about absorbing mana. The cat said okay. The little cat stood up as usual and started meowing, trying to concentrate, but he couldn't do anything. He turned around, looked at the guy and said that for some reason he couldn't do it. Hawk thought that this little cat had some conditions again. He needed to think about how to do it right. After all, what kind of mana did the little cat absorb before? It was a mana storage cell, created from processed magic stone or candle mana clot obtained from processed magic stems. He was also good at absorbing mana from the world's firewood that parasitized on the wyvern's body. Hawk had to think and make the right decision. As a little cat it is better to do it. He understood that only the mana used by the golem was absorbed from the cell, and from the magic candle it absorbed both the activated magic and the mana of the candle itself. In the case of the world tree, everything was completely different. He was able to do this only after was able to absorb mana after damaging the glowing branch that was sticking out of his head. At that moment Hawk began to pull the glowing branches out of the box. He needed to understand that if he really damaged one of these branches, then everything would work out. At that moment, Hawk looked at the teacher Sirius lying in this box and thought that he understood everything. Apparently, in fact, these were the very branches of the world tree that surrounded him on all sides. He decided that he had to damage one of those glowing branches sticking out of his chest. As soon as he did this, he shouted to the little kitten that he could now absorb. The kitten meowed. He really succeeded at that moment, and the little kitten began to absorb the mana that was collected around Sirius. When Hawk saw this result, he said that it was great and they did it. The branches disappeared. But immediately after that he saw that in the center of Sirius' chest lay a magic stone. The little cat turned to Hawk, but the boy was thinking about something completely different at that moment and didn't pay attention to him. Then the little cat said that something was strange inside him. The boy turned around and saw a huge cat. He was very surprised. The first thing he thought about was what it was and why this little cat had become so huge. The cat was really so huge that its head was visible from behind the treetops. The little kitten remained the same little one at heart. He didn't understand what was happening to him and he meowed loudly. Hawk was a little scared because this little kitten kept growing and he tried to yell at him to stop. The little cat said that it was very strange, but he can't control his growth and it hurts him a lot. Hawk thought if mana hurts then he better not endure and use magic. He shouldn't be upset. Suddenly, the same girl who checked the kitten appeared in this place and shouted that this method is very dangerous. Then she went up to the kitten and said that he was a good little cat and she would help him. The girl looked him straight in the eyes and said that if the kitten was afraid, she would quickly heal him. Hawk came closer to her and shouted at her to leave. If she did anything suspicious then he would kill her, and presented a dagger to her neck. The girl said that she came to help and Hawk should stop, and most importantly he should remove the dagger. Hawk at that moment thought that he really remembered this girl and he had met her. She was actually a guide in the guild and she was very nice and helpful back then. Hawk suddenly removed the dagger from her neck. He asked if she had been following them. The girl replied that she had just been passing by and saw a huge cat. The little cat turned to Hawk. He said that he was in a lot of pain. The girl then said that she was a specialist in magic and magical creatures and she knew why the code became like this and was ready to help him. The little cat turned to Hawk because he was really in pain and he was also scared. Then the guy leaned over and told the girl that if something happened to the cat, she would die by his hand. The girl replied that he shouldn't scare her, she already understood everything. After that, he removed his dagger from her throat and let her go to help the little cat. The girl exhaled and the guy told her to quickly save his cat. The girl turned around and told him that if he wanted her to do it quickly, then first he had to give her all the mana vessels he had. The guy thought maybe he should just kill her. He showed that he only had empty cells and handed them to her. When she saw these blank checks, she told him not to worry, that's exactly what was needed. Then she threw these empty cells up, saying that the cat now has too much mana, and if you redirect the excess into the cells, it will return to its previous state. After some time, the little cat became as small as before and he fell right into the girl's arms. When she picked up this little cat, she said that he held up well and that it was all over for him. After all this, Hawk thought that it meant she filled all the cells with the cat's mana. The girl contacted and said that everything was fine with the cat and gave the cells to Hawk. The guy thanked her for her help and asked who she really was that she was able to help them in time. The girl didn't quite understand where such politeness came from. She said that her name was Wendy and she was traveling. Hawk was very surprised when he heard the Wandering One, because in fact he saw her in the guild. At that moment they heard someone else's voice saying that this means this magical creature already has an owner. Hawk, seeing that he was surrounded on all sides, thought that today there were too many surprises for one day. The commander and several other knights who accompanied him surrounded Hawk, the girl, and the box in which Sirius lay from all sides. The commander smiled and greeted them. He said that his name was Harold Mont Blanc and he was a knight of the Kingdom of Garnets. He was silent for a while and said that from now on they were all under his control. Hawk stood and next to him stood a girl holding his little kitten in her arms. He thought if he was alone he could easily slip away from these guys. But the most important thing is that he definitely couldn't leave Sirius, who was lying in the box, and the cat. Moreover, he saw that his little cat was lying in the girl's arms with his eyes closed and was very comfortable there. He looked at this commander who was confident that he could handle them. I grabbed my head and thought that what he was talking about was of course very funny. So he took a step forward and asked again if the commander really intended to arrest them, to which he replied that so as not to be misunderstood, he was simply fulfilling his duties. After which he thrust the huge sword that was in his hands into the ground with all his might. After which the commander said that without his permission they couldn't pass through this place and he had already explained it to them very clearly. Hawk looked at him and said that he wasn't quite sure what he meant when he said that. After which Hawk took out his ID and introduced himself as being engaged in interstate hunting activities. After which he explained that even the army has no right to hinder the movement of hunters. The girl confirmed his words. The commander said that a hunter's license is of course good, but in this situation everything is different. The world tree appeared and ordinary people know it as a sacred tree. In any case, having read the newspaper, Hawk thought and again he was the same investigator whom he had seen just recently. The commander continued to talk about how, out of curiosity and thirst for glory, many deep people strive to get into the kingdom of Topaz. The guy thought about the investigator standing in front of him. It was unclear what was on his mind and what he was planning. It was difficult to tell from his facial expression. At that moment, a huge hand blocked the entire view of Hawk, trying to press on him from above. The commander turned to the guy and told him not to dare ignore him. Hawk got very angry and told the commander to take his hand off his head. The commander then replied, "Is he really so impudent that he dares to follow his orders?" Hawk didn't answer him. He just looked through his protective helmet at the commander. At that moment the investigator came up and put his hand on the commander's shoulder and told him to stop, because he could die like that. The commander then said that he got carried away and asked for forgiveness. The girl also asked the guy if he was okay. At that moment Hawk grabbed his cat by the collar and said that he was taking him away. The girl was a little upset, after which he put his little cat on his shoulder and thought that this girl couldn't be trusted either. After all, it actually represents a page, although it belongs to a guild and thinks that no one knows about it. Hawk at that moment thought that this whole situation and this place were driving everyone crazy. One of the sergeants shouted to the commander to look at him and what was around him. This sergeant opened the lid of the box and started shouting that there was a dead body in it. When the commander approached this box, he looked at its contents and was indeed convinced that there was a corpse inside. The commander turned and called out to Sergeant Jackson. The sergeant responded and stepped forward, after which the commander ordered the sergeant to take them all into custody. The sergeant replied yes. The girl who was standing next to Hawk took a deep breath and said what should they do in this situation? Hawk turned to look at her and told her to stop pretending that she was with them. The girl said that the commander told them. The commander looked at them and said that they were criminals and that they had some kind of sinister thirst for blood. He wanted to know how much life they had taken. He asked that up to this point they had already killed dozens, maybe even hundreds. Hawk looked at him and said that he usually listens to the explanation first and in fact these are the dead, and his friend the little cat asked what he was doing. Hawk continued to say that he was returning to the kingdom of Topaz to bury him on his native soil. The commander listened to him until the end and asked him if he really thought they would believe his explanation. Hawk, when he heard this question, thought about the little cat, asked, "Will you really have to fight again?" The investigator intervened in this conversation and said that he thought the guy was telling the truth. The clothes of the deceased were identical to the equipment of this man. The investigator also said that strong hunters often emit a powerful aura and suggested that maybe they should just let them pass. The commander turned his head, looked at the investigator and said that even if they passed, they would still be finished off by the mutants. The investigator then told the commander that they could then check if they were strong enough to survive by crossing the border. "Isn't that why they came here?" The commander thought about what the investigator had said and decided that maybe they really should provide an investigation. Hawk approved. She said that he refuses and did not understand why on earth he should get their assessment. "Commander and investigator, you are very surprised because you said that they are giving him such an opportunity." Hawk suddenly said that they can just attack him. He will destroy them all and pass no matter what. The captain smiled at that moment. It seemed to him that the guy's words were not very convincing. After which he laughed very loudly. No one understood what exactly could make the captain laugh so much. Hawk looked at the captain and also did not understand why he took his words that way. After the captain stopped laughing, he said that it was good and if the guy beat him, he would pass the test and offered to fight. The captain also ordered everyone else not to interfere, because this was a duel between Jenna and whom the knight had the honor of. On one of the other sides of each of them, he put a capsule of mana into his weapon. Hawk on the one hand was ready to enter the battle. He was completely confident in his abilities. On the other side was the captain, who was also confident in his strength and his equipment. Hawk thought for a moment that the captain had a huge sword in his hands all the time. This was most likely his magical weapon. The captain raised his sword above his head and swung it, then shouted "Explode," after which he said "Hypernova." How he formed a magic circle around himself that he thought was unbearable to break. Hawk at this moment brought to attack his opponent. He thought that this captain was some kind of noisy. Hawk, until he reached his opponent, was thinking about what weapon he would fight with. As the boy got closer, he tried to break the magical field that was around the captain with the wyvern blade. Well, he made one blow and noticed that the blade was damaged and it was no longer possible to fight with it. At that moment, his opponent tried to strike and the guy managed to dodge the blow at the last moment. Let's hand over his opponents once again tried to strike and Hawk also managed to avoid the blow by jumping back. When Hawk landed, he thought it was some kind of curse. He didn't think it would be so difficult. And the most important thing is that the wyvern's blade is too weak. He thought for a bit and decided to finish the attack with the golem. Hawk extended his hand forward to launch the golem to begin attacking with it. He lowered his eyes to the golem. You realized that something was wrong with him, as a large amount of mana was emanating from him. Hawk put herself in the mindset that this was an incomprehensible reaction and most likely something could happen. That's exactly how I got the next moment because of the large content and the mana cell golem just exploded in his hands. The little cat was thrown aside and only managed to meow a few times, after which he fell face down on the ground and lay there without moving. Then the little cat stood up on his paws and looked around. He needed to understand what had happened. He saw Hawk lying on the ground. The little cat was very upset and called him. The guy held a dagger in his hand and didn't understand what was happening. He thought it was some kind of curse. On each of his fingers there was a gold ring. He was holding the wound with one hand. I don't understand why he ended up in this situation. This guy couldn't hold back and started screaming what the hell. He wanted to know what he did. In front of him stood another guy in black who said that the investigation was complete. The investigator had 2 axes in his hands. This guy also said that he committed a terrible crime because he became a slave trader. His name was Julio and he didn't agree with this verdict. He said that it was the guy in black who was doing the terrible things. Well, this guy didn't seem to listen to him. He kept saying that it was time for him to answer for his actions and he had to die. Julio, with his last strength, gave up attacking and shouted that he himself would die. The bastard. The guy got ready, swung and struck his opponent with an axe. This blow was just exactly right for us. It hit Julio right in the head and instantly threw him back. The guy stood there for a few more minutes watching the slave trader's body lying on the ground and showing no signs of life. After which the guy lowered his head over this matter, looked carefully and said that the mission was accomplished. After the mission was completed, he went outside and saw his teacher standing there. The boy was surprised because teacher Sirius was in this place. The teacher wanted to know what happened to the task. The boy replied that the task was completely completed. At that moment the teacher did not answer him anything. After which he said that everything was clear to him and began to remove the metal helmet from his head. When the teacher took off his helmet, he told the boy that it was a great job. The boy asked the teacher something caught his attention. The teacher said he should take a look at it too. They turned their heads and looked at the many people who were below. These were the very people that Hawk saved. Some of them simply prayed to God because they were able to be saved, others could not hold back their tears, and some were there even with their entire families, along with their small children, who were also saved. Hawk looked at all these people and realized that he had put his efforts into saving them. After which the guy said that to be honest, he was afraid that he would repeat the senseless murder as in childhood when he was a soldier. Teacher Sirius said that murder is murder anyway, the essence of his actions has not changed. But in this situation, the murder is not in vain, at least he saved someone's life in this way. Hawk thought about it and said that it was most likely so, after which he thanked his teacher. Siri's teacher asked why he acted alone since they had agreed on their pairing. The teacher added that when Rina found out about this, she became furious. Hawk replied to his teacher that he was more comfortable alone and that the mission was ultimately accomplished. At that moment someone hit him in the ass. It was Rina. She shouted that the guy was a traitor. The teacher didn't let the boy fall down. He caught him and held him with his strength. Sirius asked Ren if she really wanted to kill her friend. The girl replied that this bastard had fooled her. Hawk replied that it was not true. The girl began to tell that Hawk said that the mission would only be the next day, and he himself went to carry it out. The teacher asked the boy if it was true and looked at him. He wanted to see his reaction. Hawk looked at them both and said that he hadn't lied at all. Renee said that the next day, but he himself came early, he simply didn't warn them. The girl was furious. She wanted to know why he didn't tell her right away, because Anish is actually a team member. The guy told her that he wanted to cope on his own. He said it very sincerely. The girl was indignant and said that he was weak against sudden attacks, just that if instead of a kick there had been an arrow, he would already be dead. The guy told her that she did not own a bow. The teacher looked at the boy and told him that he was wrong and should apologize to her. Hawk lowered his head and said sorry. Teacher Sirius noted that his vulnerability to sudden attacks was indeed a fact and for now they had to act as a team. The guy wanted to know if there was a way to stay stronger against them and what his actions were. The girl looked at him and said that he should just trust his friends. The teacher said that was right, after which he looked at the girl and said that however, she should be able to doubt her allies. The teacher added that they are not always sincere and it is necessary to learn to read their intentions and analyze the situation. Rina didn't scream anymore after these words, she fell silent and she simply had nothing to say in response to the teacher. The teacher then said that one was too trusting of her comrades, the other was not able to trust them. That is why he united them and so that they could develop by influencing each other. The teacher also said that although it is impossible to instantly change one's worldview, he had a golem in his hands. The teacher threw it towards the boy and said that he took it and that it would be useful to him. Hawk caught the golem, looked at it carefully. He understood that it was most likely a magical weapon. Teacher Sirius confirmed that it is indeed a self-magical weapon and if he can establish a connection it will obey his commands. Hawk looked at this magical weapon and thought of it as a living being. The teacher also added that the golem remembers his weak points. The boy thanked the teacher for such a gift. Rina looked at the teacher and said that she would like to get something too. The teacher replied that upon his return he would give her something. The girl said that she wanted an onion. Teacher Sirius put his iron helmet on his head and said that it was time for them to return. His disciples obediently followed him. At that moment he was betrayed by the mission of knights in death. After returning, Rina received a bow. Teacher Sirius said that this cloak is a symbol of being a student of the Death Knights. When Hawk received the same dress, he felt proud because it was a symbol of the Death Knights. But after some time he realized that they are not always sincere. When he first heard about this, he thought that this was advice for Rina. At that moment he remembered what his teacher always told him, that it was necessary to learn to read their intentions and analyze the situation. After which he saw how people close to him die. For him these are Death Knights. He didn't understand why the other Death Knights and the commander died and he asked only one question: why? He was in great pain and he did not understand why his teacher Sirius died along with the others. The only justification for all this he thought was that he apparently still wasn't experienced enough. At that moment, he extended his hand forward and wanted to attack with the golem. He screamed loudly and then suddenly opened his eyes and felt pain, after which he stood up and saw that one hand and his whole body was bandaged. Was it really a dream or not? Were these memories? After assessing the situation a little, he thought that Sirius was really dead and now all the other knights were of no importance. At that moment a little year jumped right on his face. He was very happy that the guy woke up. The little cat screamed loudly that Hawk had come to life. The guy answered him that he had not died. He should calm down. At that moment the guy began to remember what happened and what he could remember. He remembered correctly that the golem exploded right in his hands, after which he fell and didn't remember anything else. When he tried to get up he thought, if this is so then this is the army camp of the kingdom of Garnets. At that moment, that same girl came into the tent. She said that she was very glad that he came to his senses. She brought him some food. She dropped the food she brought on the floor because she couldn't hold it. Hawk wasn't going to listen to her until the end. He stood up and grabbed her by the neck and then lifted her up. The guy first of all wanted to know what she did with the cell, since it was because of this cell that the explosion occurred. The girl could barely breathe. She asked for only one thing, that he would pardon her and not kill her. The little cat looked at what was happening. He didn't know how to react. He just meowed. At that moment the little cat thought that Hawk had started a fight again. The little cat knew perfectly well that this girl named Wendy had helped him. She had even taken care of Hawk's wounds. The little cat couldn't stand aside. He shouted to the boy so that he could hear him, because in India there is a good man and he shouldn't harm her. Hawk continued to hold her by the throat. He said that this woman charged the energy cell, which is why the golem exploded. He asked the kitten if he really didn't understand what this meant. The little cat looked at his best friend and said that maybe everything is not like that at all. Hawk turned his head, looked at the little cat and said that if so, then just quietly at that moment the girl used a technique on him. When she got free she said that she almost went to the other world. At that moment she held the guy on the floor. Wendy didn't understand who was immediately grabbing him by the throat. He could have given at least a minute to explain. The guy was clenching his fist with all his might, which the girl was holding with both her hands. She told him that he could loosen his tab otherwise he would break his arm. Hawk was not going to listen to her under any circumstances. He tried with all his might, despite the pain, to free himself, and accordingly he threw the girl aside so that she could not hold him back in any way. Wendy, when he threw her aside, she was very surprised and did not understand why he was doing this. The very next moment she fell on the other side of this room. When she landed she thought that he was really strong. Rising from the ground, the girl felt all the force with which he threw her away. She only managed to get up and still didn't understand what would happen next. She saw how he was already trying to attack her. Wendy tried to stop him with her energy. She said that she acknowledged that her actions might seem strange, but in reality it was just self-defense. She was trying to make him hear her. At that moment she saw that some object was flying straight at her and if she didn't do anything she would get hit. The girl managed to put up a protective bullet at the last moment and this object hit this protective field. She was very surprised because he had just thrown the mug she had brought at her. She looked at him and saw that he had in his hand the shards of the very plate that had been broken. The girl got very angry. Vitya, she didn't bring them for him to try to kill her with them. When he was very close, she began to concentrate her magical powers. It seemed that just a little more and he would be able to hit her with those very shards of the plate. Well, something good happened the very next moment. He was definitely not prepared for such a turn of events. He was upset because the girl disappeared. She used a teleportation spell. He looked at the shard that was in his hands and was very upset because it was covered in blood. He thought that this couldn't be. Most likely it was just invisibility. He saw drops of blood that were located in a path. Then the thought came to him that if he thought about it, then her body was also translucent. Understanding all this, it is then possible to resist her. He even assumed how this can be done. Hawk several times the castle turned around itself to make a certain circle, realizing that she was somewhere very close. The girl was very scared. She was no longer invisible, but simply transparent. She understood that her blood was giving her away. At that moment she wondered if he was really serious and if he was out of his mind. The guy looked forward at that moment and was very surprised because he couldn't have imagined this. He saw in front of him not one but three silhouettes at once. It was unclear which of these three was the real one. Oh, that moment a little cat ran up to him and asked the guy to stop. He said that they didn't need to fight. The guy went to the kitten, lifted it up by the head and said that he needed his help. The kitten was in pain and meowed. At that moment the guy put him on his shoulder and said that the kitten should remember their rules, that they fight together and he should use his magic so that Russia can cast her spells. Unexpectedly for the guy, the kitten screamed that he didn't want to do it. Hawk looked at the kitten and reminded him that these were his rules. Was he really giving up on them? The girl watched the guy from the side and did not understand what he was doing in the middle of the battle. On the other hand, she understood that this was a good moment for her and she should take advantage of it. Hawk at that moment turned his head and looked at the silhouette and was very surprised. Since there were two of them, that means one of them disappeared. That was the real her. Hawk shouted at the kitten to absorb mana faster or else it would be the end of them. The kitten resisted. The little cat said that the girl helped them and he couldn't do that to her. The little cat said that she helped him and looked after the guy and he wants to kill her. Hawk was very surprised by his words and asked again that at that moment she was already behind and ready to attack. Hawk was not prepared for this turn of events. He missed this blow. The little cat flew to the side. When the guy realized what had happened, he thought that it was a sudden attack that was from behind. And there the real Wendy was. She was not among those two silhouettes next to which he stood. After he approached these two silhouettes, mana from both of them began to surround him and bind him by his arms and legs. He understood that he had nothing to resist with. The only thing was that he definitely wasn't going to forgive her for that. The little cat asked the girl if everything was okay with the guy. She told him not to be afraid. She just tied him up. Hawk didn't understand anything. How could you not follow your own rules? The guy thought that most likely it was the cat who thought that he could only kill his opponents. The girl said that it looked like he would have to take him to the investigator. Hawk then realized that this man was also involved. She was talking about Lucas Investigator, whom he had already met several times. When they brought him to the investigator, Luca told him not to frown, because he was not his enemy at all. At that moment, he was sharpening his knife. The guy couldn't get untied, so he asked the investigator if he was really going to torture him. And then he added that the investigator is finally showing his true face. The investigator said that he was saying some terrible things. He was just cutting up the goblins he had caught. After all, this is necessary. Monster trophies are a guild service. Hawk turned to the investigator and said that maybe then he would untie him. Apparently it was inconvenient. The investigator said that he would of course untie him when he calmed down here. he doesn't want to fight with him. Hawk looked at him and said that he was ready and could untie him already, but anyway, from his expression it was clear that he would start fighting. The investigator looked at him and grinned because he doubted his sincerity. After which the investigator said that before releasing him, the misunderstanding needed to be sorted out and they needed to talk. A bird with magical powers flew up to this camp, which was set up on a huge area, and at the place where the black cat was buried, glowing branches began to sprout. Oh, at that very time Wendy was sitting on a huge box with a small cat lying on her lap. The next moment the investigator came out and told the girl that she could come in. She agreed. The girl asked only one thing, Mr. Hawk. He calmed down and can speak. The investigator then explained to her that she needed to explain their intentions to him so that he would understand. Wendy, when she heard about this, she said, "Is he really sure that it is really necessary to do this?" The investigator then told her not to worry because everything would be fine. The girl hesitated a little, but she decided that she had no choice but to listen to the investigator. Hawk continued to sit tied up. He demanded that they at least give him normal clothes. The investigator said that at this moment it is possible only in this way and it is much more dangerous than it seems at first glance. The girl added that there are too many objects in this room that could be a weapon in his hands. Hawk to find out what the essence of this misunderstanding is and what they mean when they talk about all this. The investigator tried to explain to him that they were not his enemies and that this conversation was to clarify the situation. The guy answered him either they take him for an idiot or they themselves do not understand something. The investigator also did not understand why the guy was so hostile towards them, because they were not going to ignore his opinion. Hawk said he couldn't trust someone who was so confident in calling himself an ally. At that moment the investigator thought about it and had nothing to say to the guy. Hawk continued to say that even within the same organization, people can wish each other dead under certain circumstances and they, whose intentions and identities are unknown to him, claim that they are not enemies. The investigator closed his eyes and said that it was true and there was logic in his words. Then the investigator bowed and asked for forgiveness for his indiscretion. Hawk at that moment, when he saw that this guy was bowing in front of him, he asked what he was doing. The investigator continued his bow and said that this was his apology for the mistake he had made and to strengthen their mutual trust. Hawk, I have nothing more to say to you. He decided to listen to what this guy would tell him. The investigator began to say that he believed that they were interested in learning about their purpose. Hoku was really interested in this, but he didn't say anything. He just decided to listen carefully. Then the investigator Luca said that they had one goal, to help him fulfill the promise he made too. At that moment the little cat asked again about the promise. Was it really the same when they said to always be together? At that moment there was a minute of silence in the room. No one said anything. Even the code fell silent for a while. Hawk thought for a moment and asked the investigator what promise he was talking about. The investigator answered him unequivocally that he promised the little cat to save the world. And then he looked at the guy and asked him again if he had really forgotten about this promise. Hawk thought it was some kind of curse, but he actually said when he was calming the little cat that they could save the world. He looked again at the little cat and remembered the very moment when he promised to do it. He couldn't deny it. The little cat said, "Does that mean his promise not to be together?" Hawk closed his eyes tightly. He needed to think about what to do next. For Diamond opened his eyes and said that he remembers his promise. But what benefit will they get by helping him? The investigator said that before answering his question he had to clarify something. He started saying that their actions were in no way connected with the Death Knights. He had finished all business with them after handing over the body, and currently follow act exclusively as a guild investigator. Hawk interrupted him at this point and said he could answer his question. The investigator then asked the guy if he knew the true purpose of creating the Hunters Guild. Hawk then decided that he was getting off topic again. But he decided to answer and said that control and distribution of resources obtained during hunting of dangerous creatures. Investigators told him that this was wrong and that there was a more noble goal. And this goal is to provide support to hunters confronting dangerous creatures and ultimately raise a hero who will save humanity. He looked at the bathhouse again and said that this is the true purpose of the guild. Hawk didn't understand what hero meant. Was he really talking about some knight in a fairy tale? Investigator Lucas answered him that it was somewhere exactly like that, and he thinks at that moment the guy interrupted him and said that no, he intends to make the kitten this hero. The little cat heard their conversation and asked again what a hero is. Since when had he never heard this word? The girl who held him in her arms said that he was the most outstanding person, or rather cat. Then the little cat said that he wanted to become the most outstanding cat. The investigator answered him that it was possible if they joined them. Hawk clearly told the little cat not to trust these people. And Dim added that these people want to use his abilities on the world tree. When all the mana is absorbed it will disappear, but his body will not withstand such a load. If you try to absorb the mana of the main body of the world tree, it could cost him his life. In fact, these people were just planning to sacrifice him to destroy this world tree. The girl couldn't hold back and started screaming that they weren't going to sacrifice anything and that she was in this place to prevent something like that. The guy asked her if she really wanted him to believe her, because she had already deceived them several times by calling herself a wandering magician, although she belonged to a guild. The girl tried to return. She said that it was not a lie, she works under a contract. The guy was very surprised what it means under the contract and decided to listen to her until the end. The investigator added that even with him he was fired from the Bush property. Now it was unclear which of them was to blame. Hawk asked the girl to explain why she destroyed his golem. She started to explain that it was an accident, and of course she thought about it. She assumes that the cause of the explosion was excessive overload. This is most likely due to the fact that the mana of the world tree has exceptional frequency and power. Probably, ordinary magic weapons are not able to cope with such mana. The guy thought at that moment that this was the same problem as the cat. In fact, it sounded logical. At that moment the investigator asked the guy if all his doubts were resolved. He replied that no, there was one last question left. The guy wanted to know from what moment she was watching him using invisibility magic. This was an unexpected question for both the girl and the investigator, but they had to answer it. The investigator said that in fact they had been following him from the very beginning. Although the girl's meeting with him happened by chance, she was unhappy because he told him everything. The investigator continued to say, to be precise, from the moment they left the premises through the window, Miss Wendy reported his location. Hawk told him that he was quite frank in his answers, but that was not enough. Why was it necessary to arrange surveillance? The investigator replied that they needed more information about Mr. Hawk, but his extreme hostility meant that in order to help him, it was necessary to arrange a new meeting naturally. Hawk, having heard all the explanations, said that after this conversation everything becomes clear. The investigator asked him, he understood everything. Hawk clearly answered him that they were enemies. He was sure of it and they did not convince him otherwise. The girl was very surprised and asked why he came to such a conclusion. The investigator said he believed he had been sincere enough and could find out the reason why he had answered that way. Hawk told him if his intentions were to help him then he shouldn't have hidden his identity in the first place, and he didn't even interfere when they were fighting the goblins. In fact, they only appeared when the cat was in danger and not before. And what he says about a new meeting is most likely a setup. In reality it all looks funny. Hawk was completely confident that he was right, so he was not going to back down from his opinion under any circumstances. He told the investigators that if he had actually died, they would have simply taken the cat. That's right. The investigator said that he understood where the misunderstanding lay. If such were their intentions, he would have personally taken his life at the first meeting. Hawk told them that they were just observing the cat's mood because it would be problematic if he didn't like them. The investigator looked at the guy and said that he would not solve any problems by killing. Hawk raised his eyes, looked at him and said, he's probably making fun of me. At that moment, the investigator replied that he couldn't deny it. The girl screamed loudly for them to stop, and the fact that she intervened was her personal decision and not the investigator's order. Hawk said it didn't matter who made the decision, it was those actions that undermined his trust. The investigator said that there was a good reason for Miss Wendy's actions. The guy wanted to know what that reason was. Then the investigator said that it was because she was a blue light using her own life force as payment for magic, so she was against losing anyone's life, even the life of monsters. Hawk said that he knows about blue light mages because of their short lifespan. They become obsessive and selfish. The guy also said that his mother was also a blue magician, a killer who took people's lives for her own pleasure. When he said all this, the girl was simply in shock. She took all his words to heart. She was very offended and hurt to hear her side such offensive words. She tightly her lips. Then she suddenly started screaming about how she wasn't going to become like that. The girl said that since this is a power obtained at the cost of life, she strives to use it in a more worthy way. Hawk looked at her. He wanted to know what she meant when she said worthy. Then he added most likely she means when she binds or when she becomes invisible. With such abilities she could very well provide him with support. And there was no need to kill the goblins at all. Judging by her words, help could be provided by a minor matter. When she heard all these accusations against her, she understood that in some sense he was right. Then she said that she agreed and she was ready to say it straight no matter what. The girl said that she was afraid of Hawk because he entered the battle without hesitation and ran away from his enemies. She continued to say that she would not dare to appear in front of such a person. Hawk looked straight at her. He needed to understand how much she was telling the truth or was deceiving him once again. Everyone in this room was alarmed by something, and it was the sound that was coming from outside. The investigator turned his head and began to listen and said what that sound was. When he listened he said it was a bell and it was an attack warning. At that moment, the camp was really attacked and many knights were destroyed in one moment. It was that same magical bird that approached. It destroyed the knights, said that they were welcomed and it was time to have fun. This magical creature laughed and fired its magical arrows towards the army. The commander ordered all his men to prepare for defense. The warriors covered their affairs with shields in front and on top so that this magical creature could not attack them. Well, despite this creature continued to shoot magical arrows towards it. The commander raised his hand up and shouted to the archers to load their cells. The archers answered the same, yes. Sergeant Jackson came up from behind and turned to the commander. The commander asked what was going on. Sergeant Jackson told the commander to look in that direction, and it turns out that the soldiers who were attacked by magic were still alive. The commander looked and saw that they were indeed still alive. The commander saw all this and said that he understood, and in this situation he decided that he had to act differently. He shouted to the archer to wait and told everyone else that they needed to save the wounded. At that moment the commander turned and looked at Sergeant Jackson and saw that his arm had been pierced through. He asked him if everything was okay with his hand. The sergeant replied that yes, he couldn't feel it at all anymore. At that moment, this magical creature began to tell them not to worry, since none of them would be hurt, and said that they should consider this an invitation. After which this magical creature repeated once again that she was now ready to have a great time. Sergeant Jackson's hand, which had been pierced through the next minute, seemed not to listen to him, and Sergeant Jackson himself turned around, returned and tried to strike the commander. The commander standing next to him noticed and then stopped his hand, firmly clenching it into a fist, after which the commander asked the sergeant what he was doing. In fact, he was just an ordinary soldier. Sergeant Jackson replied that the commander would forgive him because this hand is everything itself. The commander looked to the side and saw that the guys who were wounded and whom they were trying to save were also attacking other soldiers. Now it became clear to them that this was an ordinary magical subjugation. And now it became clear to him that they had apparently encountered an enemy much more dangerous than he had assumed. Therefore, the commander had to decide what to do with this dangerous enemy. One of the soldiers decided that he needed to ask for help and ran to one of the tents. "Go inside," he shouted that there was a mutant attack and asked the magicians for their help and support. The investigator said that he understood everything. They will now prepare and move out after him. The soldier explained that he was begging them to hurry up. The situation was critical. At that moment, one of the wounded attacked this soldier Polt to destroy him in front of the investigator and Hawk. The investigator did not wait long. He stopped this wounded soldier with his magical powers. When the girl saw everything that was happening, she said that it was necessary to start treatment immediately. The investigators said that it was too late and that it was necessary to conserve strength. The girl tried to object. She said that it was wrong to do that and she was still trying to help. Hawk, at this point you realized that this was magic. Now he needed to figure out what to do next. When he saw the guy who had given him the gift, memories of himself came to him. He thought at that moment that this couldn't be, and most likely it was a completely different kind of magic. He thought that the one who attacked him, she must be definitely dead, just magic that accidentally skin in shape and characteristics. At that moment, Hawk caught himself thinking that this soldier had also mentioned the mutant attack. So he turned to the investigator and told him to listen. Mutants meant creatures parasitizing on the world tree. The investigator replied that yes. Hawk looked at the investigators and said that in that case he should remove the spell from him. If this is really a mutant attack, their target is probably a cat and it will be beneficial for them to release him. The investigator thought about his words, but there was some truth in them. It was in their interest to release him. The girl was indignant and said that no, they were ready to protect the cat themselves and it would be safe for him to remain tied up. Hawk looked at her and asked again how they were going to protect them. They were very much Ina herself, considering that they were planning to sacrifice him. The investigator at that moment said, "Didn't you intend to use this cat as a tool instead? It would be better to sacrifice it for the sake of saving the world. You interfered with their argument code, which told them to stop." At that moment everyone fell silent. The little cat jumped out of the girl's hands and she didn't even have time to hold him back. The little cat said that Hawk is his family and the family should stick together. And he also said that Wendy and Lucas came to their aid, so he doesn't want to fight. And then she added that everyone just wants to get rid of the tree and doesn't understand why they should be at odds with each other. Then the little year declared that they could act together and act in harmony. "Dude, at this point you thought if they continue to argue then the cat might turn away from them. Let's first join forces and free him." Hawk said that he agreed with the cat and was ready to cooperate. The little cat asked what to do with them. Hawk, without thinking twice, asked the little cat what he thought. The investigator said something actually, and not the first one, suggested joint actions. What kind of sudden change of position is this? He did not understand whether it was possible to trust the cat to such an opportunist. However, he had no grounds for refusal, so he couldn't just refuse him. It was the investigator's thoughts that turned to the girl and told her to untie Mr. Hawk. She didn't understand. Could it really be that simple? The investigator said once again that they were not enemies and extended his hand to shake it first. As soon as the girl untied Hawk, the investigator continued to hold his hand to shake Hawk's hand, which would mean that they had reached an agreement. The very next moment everything happened exactly like that. Through a handshake they came to a common opinion. The investigator was the first to come out of hiding. It was necessary to assess the situation as it was on the street. It was incomprehensible to watch how the soldiers fought among themselves. Some of them were wounded and others were not yet. The investigators and the girl looked around and made sure that the mutants were not yet visible. The girl turned the string and saw Hawk sitting next to one of the soldiers and she asked what he was doing. Hawk stood up, turned around and told her that he was preparing for battle. He needed a weapon. After which Hawk asked the investigator where the body of Sirius' teacher was. The investigator answered that it was in one of the red tents where there were a lot of boxes. The girl was very indignant and asked the investigator why he told him this, because he could run away at that moment. The investigator then said when he saw that the commander was also wounded and was ready to attack them that they should also retreat. It looks like Commander Harold was hurt and he was approaching them trying to attack them. The girl immediately used one of her weapons. She had no choice but to stop the commander. Just like the guy before, she tied him up with magical power so that he couldn't move. As soon as she managed to do this, the commander fell to the ground and lay motionless. The girl also said that she is not going to run away anywhere, she is ready to defend the investigator herself. Hawk ran very quickly towards the red tent where he was told that his teacher Sirius was located. At that moment he only thought about one thing, that he never even imagined that he would see something like this again. After all, before him was ordinary puppet magic that controlled the enemy soldiers did not obey themselves. Hawk understood perfectly well that the enemy can control not only the living but also the dead, as in this situation. So he wasn't going to engage in battle with the soldiers, he needed to get around them as quickly as possible. And most importantly, he must hurry because the enemy can get to the dead body of Sirius' teacher. He tried to throw back one of the soldiers with one blow and advance as far as possible, but another soldier was approaching him. He understood perfectly well that if he didn't hurry, then magic could subdue Sirius. The next moment, he had a magic rifle in his hands and tried to point it at one of the soldiers and shoot. Thus he threw back another soldier, but it was only a temporary solution. Hawk asked the little cat the magic on these soldiers is very strong and he can pet her. The cat said he will try. The next moment he was standing on the guy's shoulder, concentrating on absorbing the magic of these soldiers. After some time, the magic was absorbed by this little cat and they succeeded. The little cat was happy because it worked and he succeeded. The guy thought that magic is green. Hawk objected to him and said that he didn't think the cat was upset. Did he really fail? In fact, he only managed to absorb mana from the magical weapons around him. Many soldiers stopped and began to moan. Many of them said that they were in great pain from the wounds they had received. Hawk knew he would have to find the mutant and break its branches. He had no choice. The little cat suggested to the boy that he should use magic. The boy replied that his magic was too strong and that these people would die. Little Year was very surprised. Did the guy really not want them to die and kill them? He said that this is exactly how it is necessary to simply immobilize them. This is what they need at the moment. After which he decided that he had to attack them. He raised his magic weapon up, and then he threw it towards these soldiers so that this weapon hit one of them, and at that moment he made a jump. He pushed off the ground as hard as he could to make his jump as high as possible. And then he swung with all his might to strike the second one. He needed him to be immobilized too. The very next moment the guy hit one of these soldiers right on the head and this soldier fell down. He succeeded. The soldier fell to the ground. He will definitely be immobilized for some time and will not be able to stop him. After which Hawk grabbed the leg of one of these soldiers as he fell and held that leg. Then he dealt several blows to this leg so that he could not stand on his leg. This soldier silently he only groaned in pain because he had been inflicted with such a large number of wounds. Then Hawk raised his leg which had a huge boot on it, and he hit the leg with all his might so that it broke into two pieces. The very next moment, the little cat warned the boy that another one was approaching them from behind. Hawk, without turning around, raised his leg and prepared to strike the soldier. When this soldier approached him, he kicked him right in the chest, throwing him back. The wounded soldier fell to the ground and then rolled over several more times. Hawk did not stop. He decided that he should also inflict some kind of injury on the previous one. So he swung with all his might and broke both of his legs with one blow. The little cat said it looked very painful. The guy noticed that he broke in many so that they could not pursue them. Hawk looked at the little cat and said that by the way they needed to clear something up. He tried to explain that he always kills his opponents and does not take lives without reason. He wanted the little cat to know that he really was a murderer but not a butcher. The little cat said that he didn't understand the difference. After these words the little cat thought for some reason he felt very sad. Then he raised his eyes, looked at the guy and asked if he would kill the girl and the investigator. Hawk turned his head and looked at the little cat, thought for a moment, and then answered, "If he doesn't want it then it won't happen." The little cat was happy and asked again if it was true. The guy promised yes. The little cat said that he was very glad that this was a promise and he believed his Hawk. The guy thought that this little cat was a pure soul. He was so naive that he believed everything without discrimination. That's why you Tim as it is easy to use it as a tool together and no matter how paradoxical. He didn't want to see the guild turn this little cat into a bargaining chip even if he himself was using him to cover up the salvation of the world. Maybe he thought so because of his words when the little cat said that the guy was his family. Or maybe he's just justifying himself because he doesn't want to be taken away and yet. The boy understood that he really wanted to be with the little cat until he learned to choose for himself. This was his truly sincere thought. Hawk looked to the side and saw a red tent standing right in front of them. It was clear that they were in the right place. Hawk told the little cat that it was right here. Hawk said that they were there, that was the same red tent and among them there was a group visible, but there was one thing. When they approached the box where Sirius' teacher's body lay, they did not find him there. Hawk was very upset at this point because the body had actually disappeared. At some point he even became confused and wondered if it was already too late and nothing could be done. The little year turned around on the boy's shoulder and saw that danger was approaching. Raising his head, he saw many magical arrows approaching them. The only thing that the little cat Hoku managed to say was to be careful because there was danger. The little cat made a quick decision and jumped off the boy's shoulder to stop those magic arrows. The little cat had no choice but to use magic to stop this attack. He held off this attack for some time despite the fact that it was quite large. When Hawk turned around and saw what was happening, he was even more confused. The little cat said that there were too many of these magic arrows. Hawk took the little cat and put him in his place because he might not be able to handle it. Hawk decided that he needed to dodge this blow and move to the side so that he would not be reached. The very next moment they were far from this place and the entire blow did not reach its target, but did not escape from this blow. The little cat told the boy to forgive him for using magic, he just wanted to protect him. The guy told him not to worry, he did the right thing, he is alive. Thanks to him and thanked him again. It was necessary to understand whose magic it was. At that moment a monster appeared behind them and said, "Oh my god, are they really friends with each other? It's just adorable." Hawk understood that it was just a mutant and it was unclear how strong it was and whether it could be dealt with. Now the guy understood that it was this mutant who used magic. Hawk thought he was ready to deal with him before he started attacking again. So he turned around and threw a spear at the mutant, thinking that it would be enough to kill him. The mutant threw the spear aside with one movement of his hand and it did not touch him in any way. Hawk was very surprised when he saw this. Now he had to quickly decide what to do next. I laughed in his face and then said that this is fighting spirit and he is just a handsome guy. Then the mutant said that he was wrong. The unique boy at that moment he remembered her why he didn't understand, but he remembered it again. He tried again to convince himself that she was dead and that this couldn't be, but the manner of speech and the voice kept saying that it was her. After which this mutant said that they had not seen each other for a long time and then looked at him again with a sly look. Hawk no longer doubted, he understood that this couldn't be. Could it really be his mother and she became a mutant? In front of him stood the witch Lady Raver. She was a blue light mage who used her life force as payment for magic. And she was also the leader of this group of smart guys called the Nest. Her squad consisted of boy soldiers whom she called chicks. She and her chicks always fought desperately with their opponent and won. Also among them one stood out. He was one of the youngest warriors. He was the most desperate among all the chicks. When the enemy saw him, he was a little confused because he understood that this young warrior was much more capable. This young warrior was given the nickname of the witch's hunting falcon and was nicknamed Hawk. Despite his young age, he was one of her most talented soldiers and chicks. He easily destroyed the enemy. With just one swing he could cut him into several pieces. That is why he was named Hawk, which meant hawk. He was just like a hawk, fast and strong. The mutant laughed and then asked if he really recognized her even in this form. It was very sweet of him. Hawk has no doubts about anything. He said that she is his mother, but he wanted some kind of confirmation. The mutant grabbed her head and said how long it had been since she had been called that, and it had been fun, but that was all in the past. Hawk clarified that he did not have a single happy memory with her. The mutant then answered him that it didn't matter at all. She was already glad that they had met. Hawk asked her how she was able to resurrect at all. This question tormented him the most. Then she replied that he knew the answer very well and also knew the way to resurrect the dead. At that moment he remembered the wyvern he had killed, and after a while, instead of his head, glowing branches appeared. Hawk said that it was the power of the world tree, but he didn't understand why Sirius hadn't been resurrected. A little cat asked a guy if this creature was his family. Hawk replied that his entire family had died long ago and that this was a dangerous creature that was trying to introduce itself as his mother. Then he added, grabbing his weapon, that he would destroy her using all his power. The mutant answered him that it was very cruel because he was saying such words towards his mother. Well, then she asked him if he would really kill his mother again, just like last time. The guy replied that it wasn't him who did it, it was the Death Knights who killed her. Then she added that specifically one knight from the Death Knights and her son then joined their ranks. Then she raised her head, looked at him and asked if he knew why she had come. Hawk answered her that probably because of the cat's strength he understood that it was this little cat that attracted everyone to itself. She said that it is true that the rulers need a divine code, but she is concerned about something completely different. She said that her goal was to destroy the entire order of knights in death, and that was precisely why she came. Her current visit is the beginning of a party in honor of their reunion and the declaration of war. Hawk to find out what party. She kept saying that in the end they will be together again. She provoked him, asking if he missed her and if it was time for him to return to her nest. After such a confession, the guy was a little, but she really had a goal. He asked her again why she wanted to kill every single knight, and if she claimed so then the headquarters in the kingdom of Topaz was completely destroyed. The mutant laughed loudly and then asked him what he thought about it. Hawk asked her again if she really killed them all, leaving no one behind, killed every single one of them. At that moment she raised her 2 hands and said to him, "Bingo." He guessed exactly what she did. Hawk was simply furious. He understood that time had been lost, and if this was really the case, then nothing good could end. Then she said that before she decided to meet him she dealt with another one. After which she took out the bow and showed it to the guy and then asked him if he recognized it. She was talking about Ren, who had been his partner all this time. She was provoking him. And she did it really well. The guy couldn't hold back, took out his weapon and rushed to attack. When he ran closer to try to strike, she jumped up and said that it was great and he was on top as always, and then added that he would become her best puppet. Then she turned into a black bird and rose even higher so that he could not reach her. She simply became a black crow, and the young man thought that this was her true form. Hawk shouted to the little cat to attack this bird. The cat replied that he understood. The little cat learned to concentrate his powers, and then he used magic to deprive her of mana. The black crow flew away very quickly, but the magical smaller cat tried to get it. The little cat's magical power came across something much stronger than his power, and this force completely broke the magical power of the little cat. It was no longer a black crow but someone else. Hawk and the little cat watched everything that was happening from below. They did not understand what was happening. Hawk was very surprised because he saw a man in the same clothes as himself. Looking closer he saw that it was the Death Knight, but why was he on the other side? Hawk didn't understand how this could be. Could the cloak have swallowed up the world tree and the Death Knights at that moment? The little cat screamed, "Dad!" Hawk turned to look at him and asked again why he shouted, "Dad," what did he mean? Then the little cat replied that it was magic. His dad knows it very well. The crow flew up and asked the guy how he liked it. He was very surprised by everything that was happening. Then the mutant began to say that at first she planned to resurrect Sirius as a soldier, but all the mana evaporated from the body after death, and so that he would think that someone had left the corpse of a magical creature nearby, she mixed the remains in here as a gift for them. She added that she was able to mix one jewel with another and the result was their most precious enemy. Hawk couldn't listen to her until the end. He turned sharply and tried to grab her with his huge hand. But he didn't succeed. The black crow slipped out of his hands and he was left with only a few feathers. As she climbed up she shouted that the party was just beginning and that she was ready to have fun with them. Hawk told the little cat to use magic. The cat replied that for some reason it didn't work for him. Hawk told the little year then he should try to absorb her mana again. At that moment, the Death Knight who was on her side launched a magical beam at them. Hawk and the little cat managed to jump aside at the last moment to avoid this attack. The crow said that he is on her. They cannot be distracted because their enemy is on the other side and his name is definitely the Death Knight Noir. He looked at them through his metal helmet with huge green eyes. The little cat can't calm down and he kept repeating, "Daddy, this way." I try to stop him. At some point the little cat even started to shout "Daddy" and cry loudly. Tears started to flow from his eyes. At that moment the knight began to sit down slowly. In addition to the glowing branches, red spots appeared on him. It was a force that completely consumed him and at that moment it was leaving him. Wendy looked to the side and said that there was an explosion somewhere very close by. The investigator told her that it looked like Hawk had encountered a mutant. At that moment he approached one of the tied-up soldiers. Then he reached out his hand and pushed the soldier forward so that he fell. The investigator told her that he had tied everyone up and that she had to remove the binding magic that she was using to hold them. A few minutes later, after the magical ritual was performed, the girl said that everything was ready. And then she hurried. She told the investigator to go faster because they needed to help Hawk. The meadow investigator thought that she was right and that they really needed to hurry. First of all, they need to do this only because they can't let the cat go. The day was coming to an end and the sun was visible hiding behind the mountains. The Death Knight who tried to attack them, something strange happened to him. The glowing branches broke, and instead of them, a completely different force was stealing from his body, which was much greater. The crow saw this and thought that it was the magic of the red light, but she didn't understand whether the black cat's crystal had reacted. And was he able to activate just because the little cat told him? At this time the little cat seemed to Timika to stop. He kept shouting, "Dad." At that moment, the Death Knight who was right in front of them pushed off and began to attack. Running up to them very close, the Death Knight swung his hand to grab Hawk. The next moment, the Death Knight grabbed the guy by the chest and tried to throw him away. But at that moment something happened that the Death Knight did not have enough strength and he could not do it, but an explosion sounded. She said that his power was surrounded on all sides but it was very weak and he could not do anything. So he could only stand next to the guy and hold him by his crying from the front. Hawk thought that such a swift attack seemed like he should have enough strength for much more. But in fact the damage was zero. A small cat came up to the guy and asked if he was okay. Hawk replied that everything was fine. Hawk continued to look at his opponent. "I don't understand, but in fact, who is he? Otherwise he is on the sidelines." At some point it occurred to him that he was not their enemy at all and there was no need to be afraid of him. At that moment the Death Knight pulled the guy by the cloak and the little cat got very scared. Then the Death Knight asked the boy why he was going to the kingdom of Topaz. Hawk thought that this was a rather strange question and it was unclear why he was asking this. But he still decided to answer. He said that he was ready to take revenge and destroy the culprit of everything. the Lord of the Tree. For this he needed topaz. The Death Knight then told him not to put his son in danger and to return to Garnet. The little cat was very surprised and asked if this was really his dad, after which the little cat pushed off and jumped off the guy's shoulder, all the while he was shouting "Daddy." The Death Knight was simply furious at this point. He ordered the little cat not to come near him. The little cat stopped. He didn't understand why they were doing this to him, but he fulfilled his request. Hawk at that moment thought that this mutant had only the consciousness of a black cat left. He was full of anger and a desire to kill, but all this was only for the sake of protecting his son. And most importantly, he realized that then they had no reason to fight. The guy said that they couldn't leave because this woman wouldn't back down. She would pursue them until she got her way. The Death Knight added that even at this moment the World Tree was consuming his mind, and if they did not leave, he would eventually kill them both. Then he said that before it was too late he broke off one of the red branches and offered to feed it with mono. It is with his mother that they will be able to hide, and perhaps they will even be able to kill him before he goes crazy. The little cat started screaming very loudly that he didn't want to do this. The family should be together and they would never be separated. Then the Death Knight explained to him that he was already dead. This body was just a chimera created by magic. The little cat continued to scream that he didn't care that dad was dad and he didn't want him to die. The flying crow could not and gave to assume she did not understand that even the rates of measure he remained conscious. On the other hand, she also somehow managed. You got closer to them for a moment and said that only bad children are capricious. At this moment Anna was as always in a good mood and as always giggled at everything that was happening. Then it launched magic arrows towards the boy and the little cat. She said that this was a lesson in obedience for them. The Death Knight stepped forward trying to protect them. He said that he knows and sees everything. The Death Knight concentrated his power in one hand to stop the magic arrows, and with the help of his magic he created a fiery blade with which he was supposed to stop her arrows. The very next moment, he was able to use this fiery blade to throw these fiery arrows back in her direction. She didn't understand what was happening, so she needed to focus and think about how to attack next. She was just furious that the Death Knight was protecting the guy and the little cat, so she aimed even more arrows at them. The Death Knight told the little cat to absorb the mana. He must do it as quickly as possible before it is too late. The little cat only managed to fart. He was scared because he didn't want to lose his dad again. Hawk this Manan told the Death Knight that the little cat can't kill him. He should understand it himself. In fact, he is his father, and for a small cat this is a big test. The Death Knight thought about it, lowered his head and said that it was indeed so. Hawk then said if the little cat can't do it then he'll have to do it. And if there is another way other than absorbing mono he should tell him and he will kill him himself. The little cat didn't understand what was happening and asked why they were talking like that. After all, he was repeating the words of his father, who always said that murder was not the solution. The little cat was crying very loudly. He couldn't stop. You could hear him sniffling. Mutant O at this moment watching everything that was happening, I thought that what small problems they had and let them trust her, she would arrange everything in the best possible way. At that moment she tried to attack them with her magical bodies again, shouting that they should relax and enjoy themselves. The fiery arrows were getting closer and closer. It seemed that just a little more and they would pierce them right through. But this time they were stopped by another magical force that appeared from above. The mutant was very surprised. She did not understand what had happened again and she was already tired of it all. This time, the investigator and Wendy came to the aid of the boy and the little cat and stopped her attack with their power. The girl asked again if they were alive because they had come to their aid. The investigator then said that they would fight together. Then he turned his head and saw this cloak. He thought maybe the guy interrupted him and said that it was not serious, it was the cat's father. The investigator was surprised. The Death Knight, who only had half consciousness, thought that it meant they would discharge together. At that moment he remembered the very moment when he told his little cat that if he had trusted him right away and fought with him, everything would have turned out differently. Urza of Death wondered if he had almost repeated his mistake for which he had already paid. The Death Knight then told the guy he was asking about another way. He just needed to destroy both magic crystals in his body. He explained that the blue crystal was created by the power of the World Tree and that he owned the red one when he was still a magical beast. If the guy can destroy both crystals, he will simply disappear. The Death Knight said that they wouldn't do that. He just needed to know that such a method existed. The guy asked again what, after which the Death Knight said that they will really fight together because he believes in them. Hawk at this point asked what about the tree that had swallowed him. Then the Death Knight told the guy that he should entrust it to his son. After all, he is actually the most outstanding person in the world. The little cat raised his head and looked at his father. The guy also turned his head and looked at the little cat sitting on his shoulder and asked again if he really should trust the cat. The guy wanted to know and get a more detailed explanation of what exactly he needed to do. The Death Knights clearly told him that he needed to absorb mana. After which the guy asked the Death Knight again, because he himself had previously refused this. The girl intervened in the conversation. She did not understand what they were talking about at all. The Death Knight then explained that he needed to extract all the mana from the World Tree, leaving the red one. If he succeeded then the tree would not absorb him. The guy listened to him carefully and asked again if this was even possible. The Death Knight looked at him and said if he was talking about chances of survival then there are no guarantees. After which he looked at the little cat and said again that he simply believed in his son. At that moment the investigator shouted to them that they just needed to fight with such a number of people that it would not be easy to defeat one mutant. He also added that Rita is more logical than hoping for some dubious method. At that moment the little cat said so that they would understand that he wanted to save his dad. Hawk, when he heard about this, he thought about it and had nothing to say in response. The investigator also couldn't say anything to the little cat because his words hurt him. The Death Knight simply remained silent since it concerned him specifically, since he was his father. The girl at that moment guessed that this Death Knight was a chimera from Sirius and the cat's father, and in order to stop the process of absorption by the tree they need to pull out only his mono without affecting the father's. The girl said that theoretically it could work. The guy replied that magic has rules. She added that the mechanism of action is the same as in the case of the huge cat. The little cat was happy and asked if she really had a chance to forgive her father. Then the girl said that she was ready to help divide the tree's mana and offered to save it together. Hawk grabbed the kitten by the collar, handed it over and added another 10 mana cells. The girl took the cells and said that they were not suitable, she needed empty containers. The guy offered to make them for her using magic. At that moment the investigator asked where they had handed them over from. Hawk then answered that they had picked them up on the way. It was decided that the cat and the girl would deal with the separation. She promised that they would try. At that time, Hawk and the investigator decided to deal with the mutant. They just needed to buy time. If the magic worked, they would win. The investigator stopped. He didn't answer, he just looked at the guy mysteriously. Hawk saw his look and asked again if he really didn't like his clan. The investigator replied that no, because he knew the situation better than anyone else, so he would follow his instructions. Lucas, despite the fact that he agreed, said that something bothers him. The mutant does not attack while they are talking and is defenseless. After these words, Hawk thought that this was really so. Now he needed to understand what she was really planning. Hawk looked and saw that the girl and the little cat were going through a process. Wendy said that she was using mono from the cells to make the little cat stronger. Then she told the little cat if it hurts he should tell. The little cat replied that he believes in her. The guy looked at everything that was happening and said that it seemed like this plan was really working. The investigator looked at a completely different side, because he was watching the mutant and he saw that she started to move. She really approached them with her hand outstretched. She asked if she was really doing something interesting and if they were really only extracting the Manu tree. Hawk answered if it's so interesting maybe just watch from the side. He thought about the fact that against the magician you need to fight in close combat, not to give him time to cast spells. I also understood that it was too risky, it was better to try to drag out time by talking. She came closer and closer. They said that she was tired of waiting and she was already tired of their chatter. The guy then asked her what she was getting at. It was unclear why she was having this conversation. At that moment she suddenly said that the party was over and that nothing would work out for them. The guy looked at her carefully and understood that something would happen the next moment. Imagine his surprise when he found out that she could also absorb mana. It is unclear why only now she decided to use such power. At first she was just playing. At that moment, one of the cells that contained the mana he had collected fell. The guy felt completely unprotected. It seemed that he was the same boy who was her soldier. He couldn't do anything. He felt the mana streams leaving his body. The little cat at that moment screamed very loudly. Daddy called for help from the girl. The guy understood that she was sucking out even the internal currents and if this continued he would simply die. The little cat at that moment screamed that she was taking away his father's red mana too. It was clear that if this continued, they would all be in mortal danger. He needed to stop the takeover. The Death Knight told the little cat that this cannot be done. If he stops even for a second, she will take everything. The little cat was very upset. He started saying that he couldn't do anything, but the Death Knight told him to calm down. It was his father's encouragement that he told the little cat to take a deep breath and slowly begin to exhale. Little Ku repeated everything his father told him. He had to do it slowly. He had to inhale first and then you inhale and repeat it one more time. After which the Death Knight put his hand on his head and asked him better and then asked for forgiveness for dragging him into this. Then the Death Knight added that the little cat should not be afraid of anything at all, because he is the one who must save them all. The mutant at that moment said that she was wondering who would take all their mana faster or they would cleanse the Death Knight. In fact, strength decides everything and she loves such games. She wanted to know the end of the party, how they liked it and, as always, she laughed very loudly. Hawk shouted to Investigator Lucas that they were going to attack. They needed to stop her. The investigator said no, they needed to wait. Hawk was very surprised because he realized that the investigator was listening to him despite everything. Lucas answered him that the situation had changed and it would absorb his mono too if he used magic. The guy then told him that he needed to fight without magic. This was the only way they could survive. The little cat continued to scream loudly. Dad, at this moment she absorbed their Manu. Little Ku looked at the Death Knight and asked his dad how he was. The Death Knight looked at him and could not answer him anything because everything was not quite right. The investigator said if things continue like this, they will be destroyed in the near future. And then he added that they need to choose while they still have a chance. The guy asked again what he meant. Hawk didn't understand what he said. He wanted to clarify what kind of chance he meant. The investigator said at that moment that it turned out that there are also opponents who can absorb mana and they need to warn the guild. Then the guy looked at the investigator and asked if he would really leave his girlfriend and cat for this. The investigator said if they don't pass on this information, everyone heading to Topaz could die. He must report it even at the cost of his life. He believed that this was a sacrifice for a higher purpose. Everything was completely logical and he was doing everything right. Hawk didn't wait until the end. He swung and punched him in the jaw. He told him to get lost then. Splashed in all directions. The investigator did not expect such a turn of events and did not understand why. Hawk turned around the next moment to attack the enemy. This was the highest goal. Everything the investigator said about the victim and everything else was just an excuse to use people as expendable material. Hawk at that moment understood that he needed to do something because he was the only one who could change the outcome of events. That's why he said that he could do everything in his power and even more. This is what magicians called those who used mono candles for witchcraft. These candles created threads of mana that grew in the magician's body. In fact, they tried to use one of three senses: memory or life force. At that moment he wondered if there really was magic that would forcibly accelerate the growth of a thread. She had never heard of such a thing. The girl did not understand how much of her mana she had already been able to absorb and how many years of her life she had. The little cat continued to stand looking at his father and screaming "Dad!" The girl thought that the absorption of dry you can no longer stop. She didn't know what to do. She was a little confused and even started crying at that moment. She turned her head and saw that Lucas had fallen and was lying on the ground, and Hawk shouted at him that he could then get lost. When the guy started attacking, he shouted that he would do everything in his power. Wendy looked after him and repeated as best she could, namely what he meant. Lucas looked at the girl and asked her if she could stand up. She looked at him and said that he should forgive her, but her legs wouldn't obey her. The investigator wondered if her body had weakened due to the sudden growth of mana threads. The investigator looked at the girl and said that in that case their paths end there. She was very surprised, after which he turned around and very quickly began to run away. The girl remained sitting. He did not help her. She couldn't even get up to follow him. She tried to shout at him to stop. The girl sat on the ground, watched him go and tried to shout to the investigator, but he could no longer hear her. Even time Hawk moved forward, he needed to reach his goal and stop the mutant. The guy thought at that moment that he needed to kill her before she attacked the others. Nothing else came to his mind and he decided that this was all he could do. The Death Knight at that moment thought that he had an idea, and if Raven is also a chimera, then her weakness is the mana crystal. And the most important thing is that it is located in the place where the branches grow, namely, it is located in her head. The guy thought that all he had to do was find a way to get to her. The mutant invited Manu. She wanted to know what kind of stand her son had. Was it really the same technique again? He thought about what to do because he didn't want to be chopped into pieces. His only goal and his task was to stop man's absorption and hit with magic. At that moment she screamed no. She thought that with the body of a chimera she would be able to counterattack and be able to strike him. The guy was getting closer and closer to her. He set a goal for himself and walked towards it. The very next moment she decided that she could really counterattack. At that moment he pointed a dagger and an axe at her from both sides. When his weapon was very close, she tried to throw it aside. She told the guy that it was very sweet and he almost caught her off guard. Many people were surprised by her. She looked in front of her and saw a torn pentagram. She didn't know what to do. She thought that this couldn't be because ordinary weapons couldn't interrupt spells. Her only explanation was that these blades were magical weapons. At that moment the guy threw a rope at her. It was the same rope that connected the golem to him, so he tried to hold it. Then he kicked her sharply from behind so that she tightened the rope around her neck, after which she only managed to scream "My God!" but was no longer able to do anything. In fact, he stopped the absorption. Hawk didn't understand why, but it was even for the best. He succeeded despite everything. He pulled the rope sharply and tore off her head. Blood spurted in all directions. She managed to croak. The guy thought that now he could use this to completely destroy her. He took out his weapon and inserted a magic cell into it to charge it. He understood that he needed to make a mana explosion through overload. Only in this way he could destroy it, which is what he did. He pointed his gun at her body and detonated it. All he had to do was leave this place at the last moment to avoid getting hurt himself. When he ran away he thought that it was unlikely that it was all over. He needed to think about his next move. The first thing he thought about was that he first needed to return the wyvern blade and then he would think about what to do next. When he took the blade in his hands, he did not understand why the blade was glowing, and he was also very surprised that the damage had also disappeared. The mutant at that moment screamed that it was simply magnificent. He turned her into such a lovely flower. He exceeded all her expectations. When the guy turned his head, he saw that she was still alive and this upset him a little, but he was prepared for this. Then he thought that all he had to do was kill her, literally. The mutant thought that he had a very fighting spirit. But alas, he was much faster than the guy, and at that moment the mutant activated his powers and cut off the guy's hand, which contained that very blade. The guy turned around and saw that he was left without an arm. He didn't even understand at what moment it happened. At that moment he thought that the magic didn't work and he wondered what happened to the little cat and the girl. He tried to raise his head. What was his surprise that the mutant BU was tied by the girl's magical threads. She got up on her knees and said that she was very afraid of death, but it would be even worse to die without doing anything. And then it added that in that case it would also do its utmost to ensure that her death meant at least something in this life. Then she told the little year to break the mana crystal at that moment with the magic he possessed. The little cat was a little confused. He didn't understand what they wanted from him. So he took a deep breath. At that moment, the girl told him to kill the monster and save everyone who was in that place. He shouldn't be afraid. At that moment the little cat thought about his dad whom he could save. It was his dad who said that he was the one who would save everyone, so the little cat took another breath and then exhaled. For Diamond looked at his father and said, "Okay, Dad, he'll save everyone." The little cat looked ahead and thought that there was one thing. If he uses magic as usual, his dad and Hawk might get hurt. At that moment he thought maybe he could create a giant hand, but that was not the solution. They were too far away. He needed to make a decision as quickly as possible. And then it dawned on him. And the cat remembered a special spell that would save everyone. It was an imitation of his father's magic. In fact, this spell was just imitating his father's magic. But it was reinforced with 3 types in addition and became fast and deadly. The only thing is that his accuracy let him down a little and he couldn't land an accurate blow. The little cat didn't have enough skill yet, but he was very close. However, the guy was able to help him. He grabbed a magic weapon that the little cat launched, and the very next moment he directed it to the right place so that the mutant could not resist. Hawk was nearby and he was able to help the little cat get rid of the crystal. The very next moment he was able to cut off the mutant's head with the magic weapon of a small cat, where the crystal was located, after which the guy landed and he was wondering if he really succeeded. When he turned back he saw that he had hit hard enough and it had worked. He went forward where the little cat and the girl were. He thought of only one thing, that he had defeated Raven. When he approached him, he realized that he had managed only thanks to the girl and the cat. The little cat was shouting that he was very cool and the investigator was the one who really ran away. At some point he relaxed and at that same moment he felt pain pierce his body. He forgot for a moment that she had managed to cut off one of his arms. His vision darkened and he stumbled and began to fall forward from the pain and loss of blood. He tried to stay on his 2 feet, although it was difficult for him to do so. He understood that he couldn't fall because the idiot Noir was still alive. And in the next moment Noir was able to free himself from the shackles and he was already ready to attack. Hawk mentally told himself to pull himself together despite the fact that he was in severe pain. He understood that the enemy was not yet defeated and he needed to act further, otherwise everyone would die. The girl felt that if the thread of mana is used directly without candles, they are used up too quickly. She forced herself to hold on a little longer, even though it was difficult for her to do so. Noir was freed from his shackles and with a magical weapon he was ready to attack the young man. The girl closed her eyes with all her might and told everyone else to forgive her. Noir broke free. He was at full strength and ready to fight the guy and everyone else. The girl sat completely exhausted. She repeated to herself that she had tried. Then she said that she wanted to be useful and not die just like that. Then she fell down exhausted. The little cat ran up to her and started calling her, but the girl didn't answer him. She was breathing heavily. The little cat didn't understand what was wrong with her. He ran up to her from different sides and asked her if she had already reached her limit. Hawk understood that he had no one else to rely on and in that case he would have to deal with this Death Knight himself. The next moment he took off his helmet and threw it straight at the knight, realizing that he would have to fight alone. At that moment he ran up to pick up his blade which was in his other hand and was lying on the ground. Pulling the blade from his severed hand, he thought that it must not fail him. The guy had only one left hand with which he had to not only defend himself but also attack. Then he tried to attack once. He saw something unusual and realized that he was starting to succeed. It seemed strange to him that the magic had disappeared. Most likely it had not disappeared, it had simply dissipated. Then he realized that this was the ability of his blade. Now he needed to understand how it worked. He caught himself thinking that his head was not working. First he needed to finish the fight. In front of him stood his opponent and his body was sticking out shining branches. He stood motionless. The guy wondered if the Death Knight froze because of the shock wave. The very next moment something incomprehensible started to happen and the guy decided to see what would happen next. He was ready to repel the attack or, on the contrary, to start attacking himself, but everything went completely differently. The Death Knight gathered his magical powers, roared very loudly and then pushed away. The guy wondered if he had turned on the berserker mode and was about to push off the ground. Everything was exactly like that. He only managed to see how the Death Knight rose up and he could not stop him in any way. He just stood there and watched it move in the sky. The guy looked up, thinking that his opponent had just flown away. He asked himself whether it was worth pursuing him. Then he thought that no, First he needs to heal his wounds and bring himself and everyone else into order. He also thought that he needed to comprehend everything he had learned recently. At that moment he felt weak and could not hold the dagger in his hands. He dropped it on the ground, and the next moment he fell and the guy himself realized that he had lost too much blood. A small cat stood next to him and cried very loudly. He didn't know what to do. So the little cat started running around in circles and screaming, what to do, I have to catch up with Dad. He looked at the girl and then at the guy and realized that they were both unconscious. He asked himself the same question, what to do? At that moment he stopped abruptly because he remembered his father's words that he should not be afraid. He is the one who will save everyone. He thought about Dad. And most importantly, he thought that he wanted to save both the boy and the girl. He asked his father for forgiveness and said that he could not follow him. At that moment he ran up to the girl and said that he needed to use healing magic. He tried to concentrate but he couldn't do it, so he tried again. It looks like he spent all his mana and he didn't understand what to do. Suddenly the thought came to him that he should use the cell, but he didn't understand how. The voice told him that he just needed to put it to his lips and suck it in like a tube. He took the cell of the paw and began to play with it. Then he put it to his lips and began to suck it in like a tube. For a while he lay there and sucked it in. He felt mana filling his entire body. When he finished doing this he was happy that he had succeeded and it was magic. First of all, he approached the girl and said that now he could treat her. A voice from outside congratulated him. At that moment he stopped and thought. He did not understand what kind of voice was talking to him. Then he raised his head and asked who he was. He wanted to get at least some kind of answer. This voice said that her name was Lady Raven and that she was the mother of the young man she held in her arms. The little cat was very upset. He wondered if she was still alive. She then answered him that of course she was alive and that there was really nothing special there. She also said that she has several magic crystals. She is a chimera. The little cat got very angry and demanded that she give Hawk back. He even growled. Then she said if the little cat attacks her with magic she will kill him. The little cat stopped, meowed and then told her that it was unfair. She looked at her son and said that he was dying anyway and the little cat couldn't save him. When the little cat heard this, he asked again if Hawk was really dying. Then she told the little cat not to worry about the memory of how he almost killed her. She would give him a gift. She tried to use her magic to revive Hawk but he was not dead yet and he was alive. She said that she can resurrect him because she is much stronger than a small cat. After which she also said that now her son will not die but will change for the better and disappeared. The little cat ran to the guy and didn't understand because her body was disappearing before his eyes. A small cat ran up to Hawk and asked her if she was dying instead of her son. Then she answered him, is he really worried about her? There is practically nothing left of her. When only her beak was visible she still managed to say that it looked very cute. And in the next moment there was nothing left of her. She simply dissolved before our eyes. The little cat turned to her but she was gone and he didn't understand what to do next. The little cat raised his head up and looked and realized that she was no longer there. The very next moment he felt someone touching his head from above. It was a bird that landed on top of him and this bird said like not so. The little cat was very strong and got scared. He jumped up and meowed loudly. And then he landed right on the guy and hissed with anger. He didn't even imagine that they could play with him like that. He would be very indignant because she was resurrected again. The bird began to say that it was very fun to tease him. And then the bird added that she had already said that she had a lot of crystal and until they were all destroyed she would not die, although her body was now smaller. The little one then asked her how much she got for these crystals. The bird looked at him, smiled and said that she wouldn't tell him. Little Coo got angry and said, is this really a secret? Then maybe she can explain this. He wanted to know, is this guy going to become a monster? Then the bird answered the little cat, it depends only on him and no one else. The little cat didn't understand why it was up to him. He didn't want the boy to become a monster. The bird then said to the little cat, then help him for this. She told him how to absorb mana. The crystal of the world tree takes root in the carrier, thanks to which it can even resurrect the dead, but if the owner is not a magician or a magical creature, he quickly loses his mind. The little cat listened to her until the end and said that he did not understand what she was talking about. Then she explained to him once again that in order for Hawk not to turn into a brainless carcass, he needed magic. The little kitten was glad that now it became clear to him that the guy needed magic, but how to do it? Then the bird replied that it was she who was needed. With the help of magic he could awaken his consciousness. The little kitten had never encountered anything like this before, so he asked the bird, but how could he do it? The bird replied that he should awaken his memories so that he would remember who he was. She thought that the little cat would succeed. The little cat said that it was clear why she was helping, because they were fighting against each other. At that moment the bird started coughing and needed to think about what to answer the little cat. Then she said, does he really think she's helping him? The little cat was confused and asked her again if that was not so. He was very surprised. At that moment the bird hit him again on the head and spat on his forehead several times. At the same time, she told the little cat not to worry and to trust her. The bird looked at the little cat and said that he was very cute, but he was also a silly little cat. At that moment the little one was thinking about only one thing. He wanted the boy to survive, and he replied that this is exactly why he will believe her despite the fact that she is their enemy. At that moment she flapped her wing, pushed off and flew away. The little cat looked after her. The bird also said that he was a good little cat and he shouldn't let her down, and then she added that he should save the guy at any cost. She would wait for it. Then she flew away completely and told the little cat that they would meet again very soon. The little cat replied that this couldn't be and he didn't want to see her anymore because she told him to trust her but didn't explain what to do. At that moment the little cat heard the girl's voice calling him and he was glad that she was okay. The girl thanked him and said that his healing helped, but she was worried about Hawk. If this continues, he will start to mutate. The little cat told her that Raven said he could save him, so he could do it. The girl answered the little cat that she heard everything, the activation of consciousness through memories, but this is not a cure. It's just a way to keep your mind even after turning into a monster. And in order to stop the mutation, you need to extract the crystal. Well, even the guild doesn't know how to do this without killing the carrier. The girl says that he will think that only the method that his dad suggested is a working absorption of the tree's mana. But for him it is necessary to where was in consciousness comes out at the moment only the method of Raven is available to them. Namely, control over two memories is the prerogative of the magician in the green light. The little cat said that he can also use green magic, but for this he needs green mana. The girl thought for a bit and then said, maybe she needed to make a decision. Then she came closer and reached into the guy's pocket and started taking something out of there. She took out a few and a receipt and said, wow, he got so many of them. The little cat looked at the girl and asked her for a cell. He said that he was ready to use green magic. The girl said that the cell first needed to be inserted with some kind of magical weapon. The little cat then said that he could just suck it out like through a tube. The girl was very surprised. She had never heard that you can suck directly from the cell. But she decided to try. She raised the cell and the little cat sucked all the mana out of her. After just a few seconds, the little cat said that it was ready and he already had green magic. The girl looked at the seagull and wondered how it worked. She was very surprised. The little cat wanted to know what was next. Did he really just need to shout, ha? The girl said that she was not a green magician, but the principle was the same. Then the little cat opened his mouth and took a deep breath and needed to concentrate. The girl told him to imagine the effect and release mana, and then the power that burns mana is called magical power. The next moment the little cat took a deep breath. He always did this before he concentrated. The girl said the stronger the feelings the more powerful the splash. That is why who's sincere and simple-minded magician the more powerful magician he can use. So the little kitten needed to put all his wishes into magic at that moment. He took another deep breath and then exhaled. Now he just needed to concentrate. The girl at that moment said that let his passion become a flame that will light Manu. The kitten cried ha. After he shouted he released all the green magic which spread around. The little kitten didn't understand at that moment because it was very dark in front of his eyes. He hoped that it worked. He was in space. I don't understand what's happening. And he became even smaller. And the next moment he understood nothing even less. Then he felt like he fell on something hard but he didn't understand what was happening. He only had questions. When the little kitten opened his eyes and began to look around, he asked himself where he was. He heard someone say welcome and he turned around and was very scared. At that moment he heard Raven's voice, who was hugging the boy and saying that it was time for him to show all his skills. She also said that everyone thinks that children are a mirror of their parents. His hair and eye color are not bad. But then she lowered her head and said in his ear, but that's not enough to be her son. She started saying that he should be able to do what she loves most in this life. A man sat in front of them with his face covered in blood. She told the boy that he had to show what he was worth, calling him her Chuck. The little cat realized that these were Hawk's memories and that he was currently in them. The little cat caught himself thinking that he was very scared and was very worried about the little boy. The boy then asked his mother if she really wanted him to kill this man, and she answered exactly like this. Then the boy asked her again who this person was. It was really important for him to know. His mother replied that he was a hired killer and he came for her soul, which means she can kill him too, because it's logical. Then the boy looked at himself and at the man sitting in front of him. He understood that he couldn't do it. His mother then asked if he really couldn't do it. She was disappointed in her son. The boy lowered his head and said that taking life is wrong. His mother Cloud used magic. She said that it seems he did not understand this test and he cannot refuse. She constantly used magical powers in his upbringing. He had no choice but to do anything. The little cat realized that it was Hawk and at some point he decided that he needed to help him. But when he tried to do something, he couldn't do anything. The little cat was furious. At some point the little cat realized that magic doesn't work in this situation. The boy's mother told him that she understood everything and that the first time is always difficult. Then she added that she was ready to help him a little. She extended her hand and untied the sitting man. Then she said that her son's fear should disappear when real motivation appears. When this man received complete freedom, it was clear that his powers were many times greater than the powers of this boy. Then the mother told her son that from now on this man would try to kill him. And then she told him that he was ready for the upcoming fight and that he would have to kill this man. He now had a choice, either he would kill or die himself. there was no other choice. His mother said he had to prove himself worthy of joining her nest. The little cat tried to intervene in what was happening. He shouted Hawk and said that he could help him. The little year ran very quickly towards this boy, trying with all his might to prevent the murder. Then the little cat felt the same as before, complete darkness, and that he was in a state of prostration. It seemed to him that he was falling somewhere again, and this time he also did not understand what was happening. Once again he was lying in complete darkness, and this time it was unclear where. The only thing he could hear was that somewhere nearby was the witch lady Raven. When he raised his head and he heard the voice of a guy. Look around, he noticed that the place had changed a lot. He was in a completely different place. The little cat watched as the witch loved to wander through the ruins after the battle, watching people die. In fact, the squads were not created within the framework of this hobby. The mercenary contracts that the chicks received gave rise to new spectacles. The witch walked across the field, approached one of those lying on the ground and asked what was wrong with her. Then she came a little closer and said that it was unbearable because it was the hand of a dead man. Her servants didn't say anything. They were afraid to say anything against her. She looked at this hand and thought about what to do with it next. She understood that the end had come for this chick. In fact, all the joints were crushed so that this body became useless to her. She looked around and said that she needed a fresh chick, and that was it. Among the ruins she found new servo chicks hiding from the war, and Hawk was one of them. He sat behind a huge rock, covered his mouth with both hands, and thought that she would please pass by him. At that moment she came up to him and said hello to him, and she was very sweet. The first thing she noticed was that he had a very beautiful hair color, and it was after this meeting with her that he became her chick. The little cat noticed that it was dark again. It was definitely Hawk's voice, but that voice dissolved into memories. The little cat started running in the dark from one side to the other. He was trying to find the guy. The little cat didn't understand why he stupidly appeared and then disappeared, and the place kept changing. He tried to shout to him because the little cat had gone into this memory to save him. Suddenly the little cat said that he was ready to leave this place with Hawk because Wendy was also worried. At that moment the guy started saying that he was grateful to the cat and said that they were in a dream. The little cat answered him that it was not so. He used magic to make him forget this word. Then the little cat thought for a bit and said that there was something about awakening his consciousness or something like that. The guy was very surprised that this was not a dream but magic. The little cat said that he was fine, which meant everything worked out and they needed to quickly leave this place. It was too scary here. At that moment the guy said that he needed to wait. He wanted to ask for a favor. The little cat wanted to know what kind of favor it was. The boy asked the cat to look at some more of his memories. The little cat asked why. Then the boy replied that he wanted to tell him something after he saw these memories. The little cat said that he only agreed because he asked. The guy answered him, "Thank you." The little cat got ready, sat in the dark waiting for memories. He watched the guy fight the mercenary for the first time. The little cat thought that they had returned to the very place from which they had otherwise started. At that moment the little cat saw that the killer was attacking primitively, although it was possible that Raven was controlling him in this way. But despite this, there were more and more wounds on his body and he was in more and more pain. At that very moment the boy understood that every blow could be his last, and at some point he realized that if he didn't kill this mercenary himself, then this mercenary would kill him. And when the blade of this mercenary was near his eye, he clearly understood that he could die himself, so he fought to survive. It was this fight that changed the guy's life. It was in this fight that he killed for the first time. All this happened very quickly. He struck and pierced his opponent's body through and through. When he did this he pushed off the ground to inflict even more damage on his opponent. At that moment the guy couldn't stop. It seemed that if he didn't do it, he himself could die at any moment. Thus, he wounded someone he didn't even know and didn't know why he was trying to kill him. At the last moment, this hired killer began to beg the guy to pardon him. Hawk at that moment thought that he himself was bleeding and if he didn't kill, then his opponent might kill him. What happened next? She came up and said that it was very good and it was still quite inexpensive. And most importantly, she was happy and told the guy to finally finish him off. Hawk God did this for a while because he understood that one more blow and he would kill him. She stood nearby and watched everything that was happening, saying how much more could it take and why was he dragging his feet? The guy couldn't withstand such pressure, swung and dealt a fatal blow to his opponent. It was at that moment that he became the killer of a man he didn't even know and had never seen before in his life. He became one of her chicks who were killed for her amusement and who were completely subordinate to her. It was very difficult for him at that moment because he needed to realize that he had killed a person. She came up to him and said, "See, you can do it whenever you want," and hugged him. Then she added that she edited the ending a little but he would have bled out anyway, so it was his victory. And then she added that he was able to defeat a mercenary from the Knights of Death alone. This is incredible, why not a pool for pride? And then she laughed and added that he proved that he was worthy and now he can call her his mommy. The guy answered her that no, his entire family had died and she was not his mother at all. At that moment she grabbed him and lifted him up, pressing him hard. The guy began to groan in pain. She demanded that he immediately tell her that she was his mommy. The guy, barely breathing, began to squeeze out of himself first smear mom. It was very difficult for him to say this. When she heard his mother said okay, that'll do, then she hugged him. She looked at the guy and said that she was ready to reward him with a name and named him Hawk. The nest operated in the disputed territories between the Sapphire and Topaz kingdoms. The little cat found himself in the dark again. He didn't understand what it meant. The guy was talking about how they didn't serve the Sapphire kingdom as a mercenary squad. A small cat was falling down somewhere. Their main task is to capture supplies of Topaz Vova kingdom and kill scouts. The little cat thought that he was again in some unknown place. She stood there as always and said that they had done a great job and that since they had taken the supplies, the task was completed. And then she added that in that case now it was time to have some fun. They also had another task, and that was to help the witch with her hobby. When the guy came to their squad, the entertainment took on a new shade. These were no longer senseless murders. She had a plan. The knight said for the master to stay behind, he would protect him. Everyone called them chicks from the group of mercenaries nest, and they had a certain appearance. With all this, all the chicks had absolutely identical appearance, so it was impossible to recognize them. The hands were distorted by magic, turning into sharp blades. They did not need additional weapons. They also had red masks on their faces that hid their appearance and suppressed their humanity. Magic controlled them, not allowing them to get tired. It seemed that they could fight for an indefinite time. None of the chicks felt tired or felt pain from their wounds. And also not one of the chicks could doubt that what he does he must do without reservation. Not understanding what kind of enemy is in front of them and why they should engage in combat with him. Even if the opponent was much stronger and much more experienced than them, they had no choice, but they still entered the battle. Since they were just an obedient weapon of murder, nothing more, they were for her entertainment. This is what it meant to be chicks, to be completely under her power and to follow her orders. Every time they entered into battle, they did not know how strong their opponent would be and whether they would be able to win. That's exactly what happened, and this time the knight who confronted the chicks was much stronger than them. In fact, the chicks were weak in relation to the knight and the hunter, which is why many of them did not last long. The knights who could defeat them and not the same used mana cut to destroy them. After using the mana cut, the chicks immediately broke. They could not resist such magic. They fell to the ground and were no longer needed by anyone. Everyone immediately forgot about them. And immediately in their place came new chicks who also did not stay in this nest for very long. Hawk was the only one, and he was an exception. When he stood watching with her from above the battle that was taking place below, they discussed that one was no longer moving. At that moment she told the guy to get ready. It was his turn. And the most important thing is that he was the only one who was given a name, and he, among all the chicks, did not wear a red mask. She told the guy to show what he was capable of. She allowed him not to wear a mask just because his hair and eye color were the same as hers. In fact, she considered him her son and called me Hawk. She was proud of him. For Raven he was special. The little cat watched everything that was happening and did not understand why the guy asked him to look at his memories. The little cat wondered what Hawk wanted to tell him by showing him these memories. Hawk was well aware that he was her new hobby, which she had not had until that moment. She knew that Hawk could handle even an opponent that several of her chicks couldn't handle at once. All this resembled an ordinary puppet show with the same plot. From the very beginning, the chicks entered into battle with the enemy to find out what he is capable of and what magical weapons he possesses. For example, in this situation, a blade that pierces mana. Only with the help of this magical blade was the knight able to destroy several chicks with one blow. It seemed that this knight had already won this battle as the opponents were thrown back. On one hand he defended with his shield and on the other hand he carried blows. At one point, he even launched a crushing blow to destroy what he thought were all of his opponents. In fact, the show consisted of the chicks exhausting the enemy so that he could not fight properly. Only after the enemy became much weaker at that moment did Hawk come out. In Rogue Sea he thought that he had already defeated everyone and no one was threatening him anymore, but everything was completely different. The knight raised his eyes and saw how he appeared at the very end of the battle with new strength. The knight was then very indignant. Was there really anyone left? Was that really the case? He appeared in order to finish him off. Hawk first braced himself, then pushed off and began to attack his opponent. After making a few movements, he had enough time to strike and cut off his opponent's head. Then he approached the guy that this knight was protecting. The guy was very scared. Then Hawk told him to run away. Most likely he won't kill him then, but maybe not. But in fact, every time they left one survivor and gave him a chance to escape. This was necessary so that this survivor would tell everyone about him. And that is how he earned the nickname of the witch's hunting hawk. But because of the inevitable casualties that followed each battle, he did not have time to meet anyone. Every time he approached one of the chicks in the mask who died, he said that it was very mean. He did not understand why exactly the guy. Hawk was isolated and left to suffer alone because of all this, but he lived. He looked at these chicks who each time said that they also wanted to live. They tried to say something, but the witch cloud covered their mouths. She ordered them quietly, as they had already been prepared as material for her. Every time he thought only about one thing, that he wanted to somehow escape from her. She came up to him and said that this time he was great. He sent a knight to the next world. he is truly a special child. Despite all her words, he still wanted to escape her crazy hobbies. When she praised him, he always closed his eyes and thought about something completely different. For Demona, he opened his eyes and saw her again in front of him. It seemed to him that it would never end. So in order not to say anything, he simply bit his tongue so that it would hurt him too. At that moment her hand reached out to him. She wanted to touch him. When she saw that he bit his tongue and blood was flowing from his mouth, she was very upset. With all this, she told him not to be afraid, she could cure him. The guy asked her to kill him. Then she told him not to talk nonsense. Are there parents who abandon their children? The guy replied that she had just thrown out 3. The witch said that all this was not just for the sake of it, all this was for the sake of the goal in the name of their future. It was a beautiful sacrifice. The guy was lying on the ground at that moment and heard about the victim. He didn't understand how she could even talk about it. He shed a tear for her, and not everyone was just expendable material. He didn't understand why all this. Then she answered him that life is short, and for the blue light mages even shorter. She has less than a year left to live, so she wants to leave behind an heir. She said that the guy is the embodiment of her will if he kills 1,000 topaz soldiers and becomes a sapphire hero, and even after death she will remain in memory as the hero's mother. At that moment, tears were flowing from his eyes. These were not tears for Raven, but for his own helplessness. All he could do was wait for this nightmare to end. The little cat found himself in the darkness again. He turned to the boy. He wanted to know if she appreciated him at least a little bit. Hawk answered her that he had no idea and he didn't care. Her feelings weren't important to him. He said that he hated her then and now. Nothing has changed since then. The little cat looked at him and thought it was his boyfriend, then wondered maybe not. Come closer to him, he thought. Why does he have such a red mana? Maybe it's not him. Hawk continued his memories. He said that her bloody games did not stop and rumors multiplied. Until eventually they met their end when he met an opponent who was much stronger than him. And this opponent was the Death Knight. This knight, after he killed her, became his teacher. Hawk told the little cat that he took dozens of lives every day. He did this day after day, automatically. It seemed that his whole life consisted only of this. On some days he could even take hundreds of lives. It seemed like there was no end to them, and he was the only one who survived. He always had the weight of death on his shoulders. Every time she met him she said that this time he was magnificent again. This burden of deaths that he carried on his shoulders was what broke him at some point, and every time he saw her, she laughed and treated it as entertainment. He understood that he hated her the most. He had no more feelings. She looked at the battlefield and said that she had a beautiful view in front of her and that it was all his doing. She seemed proud of what he was doing, beyond the fact that she simply enjoyed it, and he was oppressed by guilt before the dead, which did not allow him to go crazy. Well, in fact, this turned out to be not enough. In the end, he forgot who he was. Every time he asked himself who he was, the witch's hunting hawk or the orphan of war, and before all this, who he was. She came up to him, hugged him and told him that he shouldn't worry if he really thought that way. He should just listen to her. She thought he was very cute. In fact, he was just a chick that never left his nest, but he had a name, Hawk. When the number of those killed by him exceeded 1,000, the end finally came. The little cat thought that this silhouette was very familiar to him. The little cat didn't understand if it was his dad. The guy said no, it was Sirius, the man lying in the coffin. At some point he appeared before them as a Death Knight. He turned to the witch Raven and said that it was time to answer for what he had done. She replied that she was not afraid and knew what they called people like him. He was just a Death Knight and he was sent as an unusual private reel. At that moment the guy asked if all the others weren't the same as those he killed. The witch replied that the Knight of Death is the name of the order, but only the chosen ones who wear such armor are called Death Knights. After which she added that if we were to call him respectfully, he was the Lord of the Death Knights. The Death Knight listened to her until the end and said that she was well informed. The witch replied that those who should know already know everything and their secret society is too loud. Then she stretched out her one finger and called him to her and said that what was more important was that he came specifically for them, which meant that they had become a real threat to Topaz. If they kill him in this fight and their fame soars to the skies, then he can only play into her hands. The Death Knight was as verbose as she was. He replied, if she wants it, she will get it. Then he looked at her once more and answered, well prepared for the fight. In fact, he was the only one who came to them and it seemed that he could not pose a threat to them. But he who prepared said that he was ready to fight them, then added that the battle with Sirius had begun. From the very beginning, the witch Raven, as always, pulled the strings in the first battle. The chicks wore him down and he had to deliver the decisive blow. A little cat watching what was happening in this June decided that he needed to run away and he was very scared. But something went wrong in this battle. The enemy was much stronger than the previous nights. He was many times greater than all of them put together and therefore easily dealt with them. Not a single attack from the chicks caused him any damage, even though they tried to attack him from several sides. At this moment he pushed off the ground in order to repel the attack from both sides. He could simultaneously counterattack the chicks and throw them back too at once, after which he calmly landed on the ground and continued the fight with the other chicks. The chicks did not stop and on the witch's orders they continued to attack the knight. But he, having dealt with one, proceeded to throw the second one aside. Sirius's hand-to-hand combat skills were as good as those of a true knight. He could see that one of the chicks was trying to attack him from behind, but he did not provide video. And also in front another chick tried to attack him. It seemed that he was in a hopeless situation. But he just jumped up at that moment and the two chicks attacked each other, causing damage to themselves. In this way he pitted them against each other while he himself walked away from them. And he also had very powerful magic that they could not resist in any sense. He could attack 4 people at once with his magic and deal damage to 4 people at once. In fact, it wasn't the chicks that were wearing him out at the beginning of the fight, but he was the one who was swearing at them. First with his skill and then with his most powerful magic using magical weapons. The chicks were captured and could not move or even approach him and they were simply defenseless. He first captured all the chicks so that they could not attack him and then struck them. He held all the chicks on a leash, not allowing them to move. At that moment Hawk entered the battle. He understood what strength was, he had never seen it before. After all, his blows, which had killed anyone who was in his path up until that moment, were powerless. When the boy approached the knight and, as usual, swung to deliver his fatal blow, he felt that he began to slow down as if something was stopping him. The Death Knight easily blocked the blow that Hawk tried to inflict on him, throwing him aside. Then the knight grabbed him by the weapon that was in his hands and held it with the help of his magic. At that moment the guy looked at the knight. He understood that even though he had lost to him in strength, but at that moment his feelings took over and it was not a feeling of fear but a feeling of delight. The Death Knight held the boy by his sharp limbs that were always present on him. The very next moment he threw the guy back. When Hawk fell, he opened his eyes and was very surprised. For such a long time he had not felt such delight and such surprise. He looked and saw his hands were free again. He was glad because the shackles had fallen off. The Death Knight then and we said that there is no need to fear him. He knows perfectly well that they are being controlled. He is ready to free them from the witch. Hawk at that moment anticipated that he would be able to live an ordinary life again. He was simply saved from it. He was internally happy that perhaps this Death Knight could save him. The guy sat on the ground and looked at the knight and it seemed to him like a knight in some fairy tale. Although his armor was black, it shone so brightly that he seemed like a positive hero at that moment.